Even though it's my least favorite out of the original 6 games, I've made a lot of FNaF 2 theories over my time on YouTube. And since the FNaF 2 movie comes out soon, I thought it would be a good idea to make a compilation of all my FNaF 2 videos to reflect on the growth of the channel over the past year. You can watch this video in the background or to sleep, it's up to you, and subscribe.
If you've been in the FNaF community for a while, you've probably heard of the theory that Fritz Smith, the secondary protagonist of Five Nights at Freddy's 2, is an alias for Michael Afton. This is a pretty popular theory because it would mean that we play as Mike in every game, which makes the games feel more connected. But is there any actual evidence for this? Or is it just a fun headcanon? Well, surprisingly, there is actually quite a bit of evidence for this. And no, it's not just the odor thing. In fact, I have something that I don't think I've ever seen anyone talk about, so make sure to stay till the end for that. Before we talk about the evidence for why Mike is Fritz, let's talk about the evidence I don't think holds up, that being the odor thing. In case you don't know, both Mike Schmidt, who is probably Michael Afton, and Fritz are fired for odor. The theory goes the reason Mike smells bad is because he already went through the events of sister location and is now a rotting corpse, so obviously he would smell bad because, you know, it's a whole corpse thing. The thing is that sister location probably takes place after FNaF 1, so he wouldn't be a corpse yet, and Fritz doesn't have to be Mike to smell bad anyway. We know that Fritz tampered with the animatronics, and we know that the animatronics smell awful.
The idea at first was to repair them. They even started retrofitting them with some of the newer technology, but they were just so ugly, you know? And the smell.
So this is a piece of evidence I don't think holds up very well, but there is more evidence that I think does actually hold up. So first, let's take a look at the actual name itself, Fritz Smith. Let's talk about the last name Smith. Smith actually has a German equivalent, which is Schmidt. Basically, Schmidt is Smith in German, which is the last name from Mike Schmidt, which is an alias Mike uses. So that's already a very good connection, I think. But there's more than just the last name to look at. The first name, Fritz, is also the same name as the child that possesses Foxy, which was revealed in FNaF 6. And Foxy is an animatronic that Mike is mostly represented by. It's even the mask he wore when he killed his brother, unless you think Mike victim. Except for FNaF 6, where he's represented by a white bear for some reason, which is also yellow sometimes. Whatever. Anyway, I do think it's an interesting connection, especially since Fritz didn't have to be the name of the Foxy kid. That's something Scott actually added after FNaF 2, and after the theory of Mike being Fritz became popular. Well, I mean, I guess the theory only became popular like a few months, like a month or two before the game came out, because that's when Matt Pett made like his video about it, and that's like when it started to take off, I think. But still, like, it wouldn't be that hard, I think. I don't know how long it takes, but I would imagine like you could probably make the graves in like a day. You all get what I'm saying? Kind of like he didn't have to be Fritz, but after theory became popular, he showed that his name was Fritz. Now, I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but I do think Scott is trying to say there might be a connection between the Fritzes. And if people can say that the Bonnie bully is Jeremy Fitzgerald because the kid who possesses Bonnie is named Jeremy, I think the Fritz thing is pretty valid.
Yo, what's up? It's Bean Editing real quick. I just want to explain more of what like my point was here. So pretty much like about the German thing, right? I said it like it was some like widely accepted community thing. It's not, like, not everyone believes that. I mean, it's been like a thing for years, and just like now it's widely becoming popular because I help on it too, but like I'm just saying, like, I want to clarify, like, I say that like everyone believes it, not everyone believes that. I just said that as like an example. So like if you think this, then you can, then I think it's valid to think this. That's just what I'm trying to say. So also about the gravestones, right? I said like it was some easy thing. I think like what my thinking is there, right? Is I think to just add like a name on a grave. I think you could probably get that done in a day. I don't know about the whole drawing, but I mean, you wouldn't have to redo the whole thing, just the grave, right? You could like, that's just my thinking. Like, I could be wrong about that, but that's just what I was thinking. I just want to explain myself in case like any of you were confused about what I meant, so yeah.
So both halves of the name can connect back to Mike in some way, which I would say is already pretty solid in and of itself. But there is another piece of evidence that I've never seen anyone talk about. It may mean nothing, but I think if it means something, it's a pretty good piece of evidence for this theory. In the completion ending of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, during Henry's speech, a few images from FNaF 1 and 2 fade in. What's interesting is that these images don't appear on the monitor, but rather appear over the whole screen, which may imply that those images are what the protagonist is thinking in the moment. Why the fuck Mike is thinking of a random hallway from FNaF 1 in like Mangle's room, I don't fucking know. Since the protagonist of FNaF 6 is most likely Michael, and we know he was Mike Schmidt from FNaF 1, would that not imply that Mike is one of the two protagonists from FNaF 2? Furthermore, these images are specifically from the cameras, which only security guards would have seen. Now, there is a possibility that Scott simply added these images to give the player more context for what Henry is saying, especially with the puppet, you know, like he was talking about Charlie, and then the puppet fades in, and he was just reusing assets, but it's still intriguing nonetheless. And with all the other evidence I've talked about, I definitely think between the two, Mike would be Fritz. Personally, I really like this theory, because I like the idea of having a main character for all the games. It makes them feel much more connected, in my opinion. And also, Mike is my favorite character, so I'm biased. Now, something I want to talk about is why. Why is Mike Fritz? What is his motivation? Well, here's what I think. This is actually just like, I don't even think there's evidence for this. This is just like spitballing. I think that Mike was like investigating Freddy's after second missing children incident. I think he was investigating it because he wanted to like redeem himself for the crying child's death. And why he chose to investigate Freddy's was because he already has a personal connection to the franchise. His father was a founder, and also it's like where he killed his brother. I mean, I guess that was Fredbear's or whatever. It's basically the same thing. This would also explain why Fritz tampers with the animatronics. It's because Mike is looking for the kids' bodies. How Mike would know to look in the animatronics, it's like, I don't know, but it doesn't really matter anyway. He doesn't find them because it seems that the second MCI are not stuffed in the suits like the original ones. I don't know what happened to the bodies, but I'm just guessing from how they're like spread out, like in that minigame, that probably, I think to me that implies that William like disposed of those bodies in a different way. I don't know. Also, I guess Mike could be working for William, but I don't really like that theory.
The second missing children's incident, nicknamed the Dead Children's Incident, or DCI by fans, is a killing spree committed by William Afton, presumably 1 week prior to the events of FNaF 2. This event is shrouded in mystery, with some questioning if it even happened at all, or if the victims of this event went on to possess any of the toy animatronics, except Mangle, who already seems possessed by the time they die. What suit did William use? It was a golden Freddy, by the way, because we can see it on the photos on the wall, and also Spring Bonnie should have been in the safe room, but whatever. But something interesting I don't really see talked about is why were these murders even committed? Because if you think about it, these kills are really kind of strange for William. Every other time William has killed someone, he has done it in like the shadows, right? For Charlie's murder, he killed her in an alley at night. For the MCI, he lured them into an off-camera safe room and killed them there. But for these murders, while they are at night, the bodies are all spread out around the building, which doesn't really fit William's MO. So basically, like, it's very different than his usual killings. But I'm not here to break down the events of the DCI. This is not a documentary. The question I'm asking is, well, that sentence should not be there. Basically, why? Why did William kill these kids? Why did he kill them so sloppily? I think this is an interesting question, because this really is the only action of William's where we don't really have a clear motive. Well, I guess none of them are clear. For Charlie's murder, it's because of jealousy for Henry, like in the novels, and, or revenge for the bite victim if you want to go down that route. For the MCI, we can assume he was experimenting with life after death, after noticing Charlie possessing the puppet, and maybe some of that, Silver Eyes wanting his own perfect family shit, whatever. For the kidnapping of Rory, we know he wanted to experiment with the fear response in children. For the creation of the Fun Times, it was once again experiments. But for the DCI, because it's never brought up again, and also never adapted as far as I know, we really don't know why he killed them, which in a way makes these murders some of the most terrifying out of his, acts. Well, obviously all of them are fucking terrible, but you know what I mean. So I'm trying to make it less scary, because I know you guys, most of you are like, 7 years old, so just trying to help you out. I have 2 ideas I want to share today, and they aren't just the basic like experimenting. I mean, I guess it could be that, but let's just say it's not. Just for fun, just for me, okay? I guess there's gonna be like a mini theory at the end too. Not really any evidence. It's more like a hypothesis. That was not a word. It's more like a hypothesis. Okay, let's just start with my first idea. A thrill kill is exactly as it sounds like. It's a premeditated or random murder that is done, just for the heck of it. There isn't really much evidence for this, I think, except for how the bodies are all over the place, and overall the scene is really sloppy, there's blood all over the place. Now, that doesn't mean William didn't plan it out. Like I said earlier, thrill killers can plan out their killings, but judging from how it differs from William's other killings, I could definitely see William becoming sloppy if he just randomly killed these guys. Even though these murders would have to be somewhat planned out, I think, unless these kids broke into Freddy's and William just took the opportunity to kill them. The reason I believe them to be planned out is because of the fact that the kids were probably there at night. I mean, we don't know for sure what even happened. Like I said, this has never been touched upon again. What I imagine is that, William just told the kids to come to Freddy's, like in a golden Freddy suit. But, that's just like speculation. So we do know William does enjoy killing. Not only can he be seen while killing, which is the only time we've seen him smile in the games. In the books, I think he like smiles at like a joke or something. But also, in Fazbear Fright, he is described as having a never-ending need to inflict pain. This could also explain why these victims were never brought up again, as, he wouldn't care about them as much as he seems to care about the MCI if that Silver Eyes family stuff carries over to the games, which I think it might. I mean, I would hope it does. I don't see why it wouldn't. So if he just killed the DCI, for fun, and he didn't see them as part of his little family, then it makes sense they wouldn't do anything with them again. However, I do think that this would be, maybe out of character for William to just kill them without a purpose, as everything else he does seems to have some reason behind it. And also these kills actually go against him, as he has to quit and go on the run from the police. Well, his alias did anyway. And even though, like I said, William did enjoy killing, he's still a smart guy, and I doubt he would kill just for fun like this. If he did kill just for fun like this, he'd probably be more quiet about it, unless maybe these murders were more planned out than I thought. In fact, maybe William wanted these bodies to be found. And this leads me into my next idea. Alright, so this one does depend on one thing, that being William was accused of being the killer of the original missing children's incident, like in the novels, which is possible, as in the first game, it was said a suspect was charged. However, it also says the suspect was convicted, and convicted actually means like he went to jail. So it's possible that this wasn't William, perhaps it was Henry instead, and he was convicted. However, in the books, William is let go because of lack of evidence, and the kills in the books are basically the same as in the games, and that is likely what happened in the games as well, to whoever got arrested. But I would say it makes sense for William to be the suspect, because in the novels, I think the whole police department basically knew he did it. Anyway, in the books, William leaves town and returns under an alias after changing his appearance enough so he isn't recognizable. I think this might be similar to what happens in the games as well. And in the games, I think, unlike in the novels, he wants to clear his name. So basically what I'm thinking is like William's thought process here, right? If he moved away, but then another 5 kids died, then obviously he couldn't have killed them because look, he's in fucking Texas, whatever. At least I think that makes sense. Let me know if it doesn't. Anyway, since his name is basically cleared because he wasn't in town, he can come back, move back. And this would also explain why, the bodies were out in the open or spread out because William wanted them to be found, which would actually probably not help him because, these kills are completely different from the last ones, but it could still work. But why would he do this? He didn't care about getting his name cleared in the novels. Well, I think it could just be, for circus babies or just business in general. Then no one's gonna do business with someone who's a suspected child murderer and everyone thinks is a child murderer. I think Elizabeth dies after 2, although Into the Pit seems to be implying that she actually does die before or after the MCI, so, I could be wrong about that. Doesn't really matter because it could still be the bunker, right? Or just basic business in general, or he just wanted to move back. That's where all his stuff was, right? That's where, like, his experiment bunker was. It was in Hurricane, so that's why he would want to come back. And, this would, again, explain how the DCI are never touched upon again if, the whole family thing with the MCI is true. Unlike the MCI, these kids are just like a means to an end. I do like this explanation better because it fits William's character more. Technically, these could still be thrill kills under any interpretation. I don't even know why I did that as a separate section. Now, honestly, I don't know if these two are right. They probably aren't, and he did just kill the DCI for experimenting purposes. I don't know. I just wanted to throw out, some other explanation. Now for the mini theory revolving everyone's favorite kid, Andrew. Well, not really a theory. I'm not even sure there's really any evidence for this. It's more of a headcanon. Basically, it's that Andrew was a DCI victim. So there's probably like 6 victims in the DCI because there's blood spatter under a table where a body might be hidden. It could be 5, but we're gonna just say it's 6 for this. However, as seen in the minigames, Mangle is already possessed somehow, so there are only 5 animatronics that the DCI could possess. Toy Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, BB, and JJ. But if there's 6 victims, then that would mean one of them wouldn't have an animatronic to latch onto, so maybe they would latch onto William, like Andrew did in Fazbear Fight. And if none of the DCI possess anything, this could still work. The problem with this, though, is the fact that in UCN, the Toy Chica, the high school years, yeah, this is real. There's 6 victims, and 1 is already dead, so that's a total of 7. So the first one's already dead, that would probably be Charlie, and the MCI has always been 5, so that 6th one is probably Andrew. Unless for some reason it jumps from the MCI to the first victim of the DCI, which would be Andrew in this case. That doesn't really make sense at all, but I just wanted to throw it out there, just for fun, and so I could get the Andrew in the thumbnail, right?
Despite being the main protagonist of the series, Michael Afton is still kind of a mysterious character. I mean, we don't even know how many games we play as him in. We can only be sure of 1, 4, and 5, but let's be honest, he is most definitely the protagonist of 6. But an even bigger question is, what is his motivation? Sure, after Sister Location, we know he wants to find his father, but for what? PJ Haywood said it was for answers, but he also said he didn't know for sure. So what? Did he want to kill William? Why? Well, today I want to talk about what I believe Mike's motives to be throughout the first 6 games. Now, I'm not sure if I'd call this a theory, more so speculation with light evidence, although I am trying to be as objective as possible with minimal headcanons. When I go into like headcanon territory, I'll be sure to tell you guys. It's only gonna be like twice anyway. And just a heads up, for this video, I'm gonna be operating under the theory Mike is Fritz. If you guys don't believe that, don't worry. I'll explain how my idea still works without that. First though, let's talk about the movie. More specifically, Vanessa in the movie. I have seen some people say that Vanessa in the movie is an adaptation of Mike from the games, even though Mike is literally the main protagonist of the movie, whatever. The thing is, I think they're right, to an extent. I think game Mike is kind of split between the two. Movie Mike has more of his backstory, with the dead little brother and blaming himself for his brother's death, even though one of the two is definitely more responsible than the other. While Vanessa adapts more of his personality and relationship with William. At least so far, we still don't know if Movie Mike is going to be revealed to be an Afton in the next ones, but I don't think so, because I've read I haven't read it, but I've seen some stuff from the novel, and if that's true, let's just say we'll have another Star Wars situation on our hands. The reason I say this is because I've seen some people say that since Vanessa in the movie knows about William's crimes, that means Mike in the games also does. I disagree with this. Although I do think Mike was working for William at one point, I also don't think he knew anything about William and the missing children until sister location. Well, I mean, I think he knew about the missing children, I just don't think he knew William had anything to do with it. I just wanted to say that because I've disagreed with it for a while, and this is the only time I'll be able to say it, so. Before we talk about my interpretation of Michael's motives, let's talk about the two most popular interpretations, Mike Hero and Mike Accomplice. Basically, Mike Hero is that Mike's main motivation is to, help the spirits and do his father's work, stuff like that. Mike Accomplice is that Mike was working with William until sister location, and then he turned against him. Under both of these interpretations, Mike is trying to redeem himself for the bite victim's death, who I'm just gonna call Garrett, just using different methods. Pretty much think of it as a hero or villain route, even though under Mike Accomplice he still isn't really a villain, but whatever, it's close enough. So you might be wondering, which one of these do I agree with? Well, my answer is neither, but also kind of both. I'll explain why. Let's start with the main clues we get from Michael's motives. The poster in FNaF 6, the Immortal and the Restless, and Michael's speech at the end of sister location. Let's talk about the poster first. The poster seems to depict the Afton family. A clown, a bear, and a man with a puppet that looks exactly like him. The reason I'm talking about this first is because I think it shows a sign of Michael's early motivations during FNaF 2. Basically, I think the poster is telling us William was using Michael, and I think that was during FNaF 2. I don't think it's during sister location, because if you think about it, Michael wasn't really doing any of William's dirty work. I know a lot of people think William sent Mike down there specifically to free Elizabeth, but I don't think that's true at all. I think he specifically sent him down there to die. I mean, think about it. Why would William want Elizabeth free? Why would he want to get rid of a test subject, especially one that's so loyal to him? And it's definitely not because he loves her, because he doesn't. He doesn't love any of his children. That's basically stated outright in the fourth closet. In the books, he literally beats his children. He beats Elizabeth, and in the books, he's really just using Elizabeth. But the books and games are a different continuity. Sure, but William's characterization stays pretty consistent. They both have basically the same motivations. They're both intelligent, they're both manipulative, and they both use their children. So basically, William doesn't really care about his kids. I think William was still planning on Elizabeth being there after Mike was done. I mean, there's even a line where it stated Elizabeth and the others have tried to escape before, but they always get put back, so I definitely don't think William wanted to let her go.
I've been out before, but they always put me back. They always put us back inside.
Anyway, back to why I think FNaF 2 is where William used Mike. I think William realized he needed to get the remnant from the toys, not the wizards, because he gets the remnant later. Or maybe not remnant, but their parts, and then he would learn about remnant after experimenting with the parts from the toys. I mean, we don't know when he discovers remnant. Or maybe he just wanted to mess with their facial recognition. Whatever you think fits best, it doesn't really matter. But he can't just go do it. I mean, we already know he worked at the FNaF 2 location, killed those kids, he quit, and now his alias is a murder suspect, presumably. And Fazbear Entertainment would definitely recognize him, and they have the whole policy of not letting previous employees in. So now how is he gonna get his parts that he needs? Well, I think this is where he realized he could use Mike to get in. I don't think he told Mike all the details though, like about the dead kids or anything like that. He probably told Mike something like, I need you to get parts for my robots, they aren't working, or something like that. And this part is a little bit more headcanon-y, but I would guess he would probably use Michael's guilt of killing Garrett against him. That might not be true though, it doesn't really matter. And yeah, I know William didn't build the toys, but I doubt Mike knew that. This also explains why in FNaF 2, Mike's alias is Fritz Smith, while every other time he works at Freddy's, his alias is Mike with a different surname. Basically, William gave him the alias to be extra careful. This could also be why the alias is the Foxy Kid. If William knew Fritz was possessing Foxy, then he gave Mike the alias as a bit of irony. I mean, it's definitely something he would do. This also shows more of William and Mike's characters. William is very careful, except for when he's not, and Mike is less careful, still using his real name, even when he's trying not to be recognized. This is even kind of backed up in the FNaF movie, where William changes his whole name and whole identity, while Vanessa only really changes her last name but keeps her first name. Also, William sending Mike will explain how Mike knows how to survive the night without a phone call, because William told him what he would have to do. He worked the night shift. And sure, the mask in the box came in after his week, but he would still probably be updated on the changes. And if you don't believe Mike is Fritz, then you could say he just heard rumors about the animatronics being able to, move around at night or trying to kill people. He has to know something though and start asking William questions for later in the story. Oh, so if you don't believe Mike is Fritz, then you can explain the poster as either it's not the Aftons, it's just the main antagonist of FNaF 6 itself, or like FNaF 1 could be when he uses Mike, I don't know, but that's just what I'm saying. So yeah, in case you don't believe Mike is Fritz. So yeah. So what now? Well, this is where I think the Immortal and the Restless comes into play. In case you don't know, the Immortal and the Restless is about this girl, Clara, trying to get this vampire, Vlad, to confess that her son is his and take responsibility for his son. Vlad continues to deny it, even though it's obviously his, until he slips up and says he bought a kid's meal. Basically meaning he does, accept the child. That's what's implied. So where does Michael come into play? Well, not only is this a show Michael watches, but he also directly talks about it in the logbook with this quote. When asked what fictional characters he relates to, Michael says this: Clara from Immortal and the Restless, because everything about this place is crazy and no one seems to notice except me. What this quote reveals to us, I think, is that Clara is a representation of Mike in this show. And Vlad? Well, he's more up for interpretation. Some think he represents Fazbear Entertainment, and that still works for what I'm going to say later, But right now I'm gonna say Vlad is William. And the baby is basically, you know, all the crimes William's committed and like the animatronics being able to move. Like basically the kids possessing the animatronics is what that is. And also let me just say real quick why I think this actually represents Mike's story and it's not just like a random show for Mike to relate to. I think so because this show appeared in Sister Location. Sister Location is a very story heavy game, and I think The Immortal and the Restless is supposed to show us kind of how Mike even got to Sister Location before it was even revealed in the custom night cutscene, kind of showing us more about what happened, just from like a different perspective. So pretty much what this means is that Mike, after working a shift at FNaF 2, he saw how strange the robots were acting, and he decided to ask William questions about it, but William just kept coming up with excuses. Maybe Mike even started to connect it to the dead kids, but that doesn't really matter. He got to a point where Mike obviously knew something was up, and that is why I think he started to work at the FNaF 1 location. Now you might be wondering, why didn't he just start working there earlier? Because he couldn't, there was always a night guard, Phone Guy. But since Phone Guy dies, Mike is able to work as a night guard so he could get more personal time with the animatronics. If he just worked in the day, he might think they only act up at night, right? If he was Fritz, and if those were the rumors he was hearing. Throughout the week, I think Mike would learn for sure that they are possessed, even if he started to suspect it before. I mean, Bonnie and Chica literally moaned right outside his door. I also think those newspapers in FNaF 1 are actual newspapers Mike read throughout the week to learn more about the MCI, but that is just, that's more of a headcanon thing. So I think on night 7, Mike tampers the animatronic to get proper confirmation whether or not they're possessed. Whether or not he does doesn't really matter. Mike has his suspicions now. He might even think William is the killer or William is involved somehow. But what does he do with that? Well, in Immortal and the Restless, it's only when Clara's actions start to get more and more extreme that Vlad slips up. Even though technically, in my opinion, the most extreme action she did was burning down Vlad's house, but then her saying she was going to sell the ring was what made Vlad slip. So, one of those is definitely more extreme than the other. But I still think it works for this. I think the extreme action was Mike working at FNaF 1, and I think William found out about that. I think Mike maybe told him, I worked at Freddy's again and I know something's up. I also think that's why Mike used an alias in FNaF 1, because I don't know what William's role would be in the company, but I still think he would be somewhat connected to Fazbear Entertainment, right? He would still be the boss of it, and I think he would know all the employees working there, even if he doesn't know them all personally. So that's why Mike would use an alias. I just want to throw that out there. But yeah, like I said, Mike basically, I think Mike maybe told him, he worked at Freddy's again, he knows something's up, he might even have brought up the dead kids. And then William, who's the great father he is, just oh shit, my kid knows about my crimes, now I have to kill him, great father. And I think that's when he sent him to Circus Babies. But before that, I think that William came clean. At least partially. Why? I'll talk about that later. But anyway, he asks, in quotation marks, for William to go to Circus Babies. Basically tell him something about he can save his sister. William didn't even know what he was talking about. I also think he tells him about the dead kids, but not that he killed them. In fact, someone else killed them, and he was even trying to help them be free. He'll help Elizabeth. I mean, Mike wanted to make up for what he did to his brother, right? That's probably more of a headcanon thing. I'll explain more why I think he told Mike about the MCI later. I also think he told Mike to get a job, he had to find an ad in a magazine. I'll discuss why I believe this later too. And then this part might be controversial, but I think right after this is when Follow Me happens. And basically, William got the remnant from the classics, not to experiment with them, but so they will kill Mike when he works there. I mean, maybe he wants to experiment with them after. Why couldn't he trust Elizabeth to do it? Because Elizabeth does not want to kill Mike. In the entered boss fight in Sister Location, they say this when they ask why Mike won't come to the scooper with them.
I don't understand. You won't die.
And then the canon ending, we see that this is true when Elizabeth gives Michael a part of her remnant, which means she is the reason he is even alive. So basically, I think she does know it's Michael. I know a lot of people think, oh no, she thought Michael was William. I do not think so. I know people think that because of what Michael said. He said, this.
They didn't recognize me at first, but then they thought I was you.
I don't think he's including Elizabeth in they. I think he's just talking about the MCI, because he refers to Elizabeth separately in that same speech. But then, why does she try to kill Mike in FNaF 6? Well, it's because she doesn't recognize him. In this death quote, when baby kills you, she says this.
You're not who I expected to see.
This means that she thought whoever was working there was just some random person.
Hey guys, I had to come in here real quick again, because there's actually another quote that she says that kind of throws a wrench in this. She also says this sometimes when she kills you.
I heard your call.
Now this just throws a wrench in, this contradicts the game too, not just my theory. But she thought William called them, right? That's that's what's implied. So she says, I heard your call after she kills you. So now why is she trying to kill William? Why is she trying to kill William? That's a whole different question. When literally, at the end of the game, she's like, I want to make you proud, right? And then also, my quote that I brought up was, you're not who I'm expecting to see. But I don't know. So I decided to throw that in there because that's interesting. I want to see you guys think about that. I still think my idea could be right because this quote kind of goes against the game as well. But yeah.
I think it was kind of interesting. This kind of reveals something about Elizabeth's character. She's basically what people think William is. Like, she's actually the one who wants to, like, keep her family alive. A lot of people think it's like William, but no, it's like Elizabeth. I think that's really interesting character. At least that's what I see it as. And another reason why I think Elizabeth knows it's actually Michael is because of this line in the Ender boss fight.
I know it was an accident.
Sure, Elizabeth's death was an accident, but it seems to me like the game is implying over and over that Mike is doing what he's doing in Sister Location mostly out of guilt.
Welcome back for another night of intellectual stimulation, pivotal career choices, and self-reflection on past mistakes.
And honestly, that's like the only time I can think of, actually, so maybe it's not like, doing it so excessively like I said. But still, I think, Elizabeth is actually talking about Garrett's death here, which, was an accident. Well, I don't know what Elizabeth is thinking in this moment. Maybe she's like, Mike is scared of something going wrong with her. I'm just like spitballing on that part. But yeah, basically the point is, definitely think Elizabeth wouldn't have killed Michael. Definitely think she recognized him. Definitely think William got the remnant to kill Michael. But then there is a problem with that. Ennard says that they have tried to escape before, but they always get put back. And if my idea is true, and like Mike literally worked at Sister Location like a week after him and William had that conversation, they wouldn't have had time to escape, pretty much. So that is a problem with it. I guess we don't know how much time there was in between William and Mike talking and Michael working at Circus Babies. If it was like a month, then I could see them trying to escape. That's just what I think, though. I guess theoretically William could have already had the remnant for them, but then I don't even know how he would talk to Mike, because it seems to me everything on Follow Me happens on the same night. Follow Me is so confusing after it was like repurposed to be Molten MCI, unless maybe it wasn't, but I'll talk about that in my Follow Me 2015 video. Even though I don't believe in that theory, I still want to discuss how it could still work. Now let's talk about Mike's monologue. So remember earlier when I said Mike has to have known something about the MCI before working at the bunker? Well, it's because of this line in Mike's monologue.
They were all there.
To me, this implies that Michael knew the MCI would be there in some way. I mean, the they here has to be the MCI, right? I mean, I don't know what else it could be. But then at the end of the speech, Michael seems pretty adamant on finding William and presumably killing him, as he has no problems with him dying in 6. And if you think it's the FNaF 3 guard, and you think he burnt down Fazbear Freddy, obviously he wanted to kill him there. So I was thinking, why would he be okay with William killing children at first, and then all of a sudden turn on him? But then I realized William didn't necessarily have to tell him the full truth, like I said earlier. And then how would Mike know he was the killer? Because he got injected with the MCI's remnant, and now has their memories. Well, actually, I guess that's not what happened in the books. I was about to say Carlton got injected, and he got memories. That's not what happened. Remnant getting injected in you get the memories right. I swear to God that's something in Frights. It's been a while since I've read any Fazbear Fright stories that weren't just for a video. Swear to God that's something in Frights where you can like get the memories from the remnant or agony, something like that. Someone in the comments please tell me. And he also got the memories of them, being killed by a yellow rabbit. And I think Michael knows that Spring Bonnie is his father's, preferred suit. So was able to put 2 to 2 together and realize that William lied and he did kill the children this whole time. And now, okay, this part is a little more of like a headcanon fan fiction, and this only works if Garrett dies first. But I think Mike might blame himself for the MCI's death if, William did kill Charlie after Garrett died as a response to his death. And no, William does not have to care about Garrett to kill Charlie. In response to it, there's this Reddit comment. Basically, William is a narcissist, and he would see basically Henry having a living child when he lost one as some sort of like personal attack. So he would, bring Henry down to his level, something like that. Basically, that's what I believe. I think it's really good. And we do know William was jealous of Henry. Novels, again, I know different continuity, but no reason to think he wasn't in the games. Anyway, William killing Charlie would lead to him realizing that she possesses the puppet, which would lead to him killing the MCI, would lead Mike to feeling guilty. That part might not be true. It actually doesn't matter if he does anyway. He's still hunting down William to kill him either way. I just thought that would be kind of cool. Also, he might want to free the spirits if you think he literally plays any role in Happiest Day at all. I think that might be possible, but I'll talk about that another day. Also, remember when I said earlier that Mike told him to find an ad in a newspaper? It's because of this line.
I found it. It was right where you said it would be.
And in the logbook, Foxy, who represents Mike, is reading the same magazine that is mentioned in Sister Location.
Whether you were approached at a job fair, read our ad in screws, bolts, and hairpins, or if this is the result of a dare, we welcome you.
The reason for this is because Mike actually works at the bunker, which means he would have to actually legally get a job. I don't know how long that would take, but basically William's like, they put ads in magazines. You just wait until you see one of those and apply that way. That's what I'm thinking. And also, William would have to get time to get the remnant from the MCI for the fun times, under my interpretation that he specifically got them to kill Mike. The only problem with this is that the next line, they were all there, and the there seems to be the same it from the last sentence, so I don't know.
Guys, I actually found a explanation for this. It is the same, the it and the there. It's basically saying like, the bunker was right where you said it would be, and that would be in the magazine. So I was thinking like the it was the application, now it's still the bunker, basically. So yeah.
And from there on out, we know the rest. Mike's main motivations for the rest of the series is to find his father, basically make him pay for everything he's done. He's basically a vigilante. Hell, in Year of the Band, someone breaks into Freddy's, steals merchandise, and instead of calling the cops, he breaks into some other woman's house to get back the merchandise. So yeah, he's definitely a vigilante. So what do you guys think? I think the story I've made up for Scott Cawthon is really satisfying and makes a nice arc. You know, Mike kills his brother, and throughout the years tries multiple different ways to make up for it. From doing what his father said to get his approval, to even investigating, you know, the animatronics himself, maybe investigating the killer at the same time, you know, trying to save his sister, and finally trying to stop the man truly responsible for everything. And if you think he has any role at all in Happiest Day, setting his brother and most of the important victims of his father free. If you're near the FNaF community and you want to play the games themselves, you're probably wondering, should I play the games in release order or chronological order? And you should probably play them in release order, but I know you want to enjoy the story in the chronological order, and I'm the same way. I played Red Dead Redemption 2 before Red Dead Redemption 1, so I definitely understand. But with that comes another question. What is the chronological order for the Five Nights at Freddy's games? If you're new here, you might not know that the timeline is heavily debated. So if you go on the internet, you'll see multiple different answers for the chronological order. Some people say to play FNaF 4 first, some people say to play FNaF Sister Location first. Today, I thought I'd help you guys figure out which order you should play the games in. I'll just tell you right now, don't play either FNaF 4 or Sister Location first. And also, I just want to say right now, I'm talking about just the main games, not any of the spin-offs. You can figure that out yourself, I guess. I'm also talking about just the main gameplay, not any of the mini games, because then this video will be very convoluted. So with that, let's just get into our first game, which is... First game you want to play is actually FNaF 2, since it's the earliest game in the timeline, obviously. It takes place in 1987, and none of the other games take place any earlier than this, despite what some people would have you believe. We know this game takes place in 1987 because it literally says it. And then after that, the next game you want to play is FNaF 1. FNaF 1 takes place in either 1992 or 1993, it doesn't really matter. The reason people think it takes place in 1992 is because it lines up more with the FNaF 2 paycheck. In that game, Jeremy's work week lasts from Sunday till Thursday, so FNaF 1, it could be the same thing. 1993 comes from the idea that Scott didn't have a set date when making this game, and most likely just went with what the community thought at the time, which is what I believe. I think the game takes place in 1993. It doesn't really matter though, since either way it takes place after FNaF 2, but before all the rest of these games. So from here is where it gets a little more complicated for these next two games I'm going to talk about, because we don't really know for sure when they happen. There's a set point in the timeline for FNaF 3, and both these games take place before that or after it. So I'm just going to say what I currently believe. So I think the next game you should play after FNaF 1 is actually FNaF Sister Location. Alright, since the timeline placement for this game is heavily debated, with some people saying it happens before FNaF 2, let me explain why I'm placing it here. So first off, we know this game has to take place at least after FNaF 2 because of something Mike says in the game.
They didn't recognize me at first, but then they thought I was you.
This line implies that Mike expected it to be recognized by them, who is most likely the souls of the children who were in the original animatronics, found themselves in the fun times. So that places it at least after FNaF 2, if Mike is Jeremy or Fritz, which is not confirmed. So if he isn't either of them, it has to be after FNaF 1. And I just want to say right now, no, the odor doesn't matter, since Phone Guy says himself that the animatronics smell awful.
The idea at first was to repair them. They even started retrofitting them with some of the newer technology, but they were just so ugly, you know? And the smell.
So Fritz tampering with the animatronics would, you know, make him smell bad. Also, Follow Me has to happen before Sister Location, and that has to happen after FNaF 1, because of the fact that the animatronic shells in FNaF 3 are the same as they were after being destroyed in Follow Me, and also the endoskeletons of the classics were most likely taken so that the MCI could be injected in the fun times. Also, in the Steam description of FNaF 3, it says that only the animatronic shells were found, you know, not the endoskeleton, so obviously they had to be taken, so they couldn't be used. They couldn't be rebuilt to be used in FNaF 1, so that means it has to be after that. Also, the building in Follow Me is obviously abandoned, so that places it, you know, after FNaF 1. And no, the whole button thing doesn't matter. In the Follow Me minigames, Bonnie and Freddy have buttons when they shouldn't have that many. This does not matter. Spring Bonnie doesn't have a button either, but Spring Trap does. So that just proves, you know, it doesn't really matter. So that's why I'm placing Sister Location after FNaF 1. The reason I'm placing it before FNaF 3 is because it just doesn't make sense for Mike to wait so many years after William's disappearance to go do the events of this game. Unless Follow Me happens like the week before FNaF 3, but that's unlikely. Then after that, I think the next game you should play is FNaF 4. The reason I'm placing it here is because we know it has to be at least after FNaF 1, since Phone Guy's Night 1 phone call can be heard in this game. And I'm placing it after Sister Location because of the survival logbook. We don't know when the logbook takes place, or if it's even a real thing in universe, but it has to be after Sister Location. And in the logbook, Mike draws Nightmare Fredbear under a section asking about recent dreams. Although, it really doesn't matter when you play this game. You can play this game before Sister Location or after FNaF 3 and nothing really changes, but I'm just placing it here. This is just where I think it probably takes place, most likely. And then after that, the next game you want to play is FNaF 3. This game takes place in either 2022 or 2023, depending on when FNaF 1 takes place, or 2017 or 2015. Yeah, there's actually a debate about when this game takes place. With some people saying, you know, it's 30 years after FNaF 1, after that Freddy's closed. So some people argue it could be 30 years after the closure of the 1985 Freddy's, or 30 years after the FNaF 2 Freddy's. Mostly due to something in the survival logbook, but I'm not getting into all of that right now, because it doesn't really matter at all. Me, personally, I think it happens 2023. Then after that, you won't play FNaF 6. It's after all the other games because characters from those games appear in states that they couldn't have been in until after the games they're in, and also it's confirmed to be after all those games. So this game most likely happens in 2023 because of HRY 223. And while 223 probably doesn't mean 2023 in universe, it's definitely supposed to be a clue for us, as 2023 was already the most commonly believed date in the community for when FNaF 3 took place. And if Scott wanted to imply it took place at a different date, he would have made it HRY 215 or HRY 217. And then after that, you want to play UCN. We know UCN is after FNaF 6 because characters from that game appear in this game, and this game acts as an epilogue for the original saga. This game also probably takes place over the course of multiple years. And then after this, if you want to, it's not confirmed if it's canon or not, but you could read the Stitch line. I personally think it's canon, but it's not confirmed, and it's not really necessary for the story. But yeah, I would read that. And then from here, it's actually easy to play the game's chronological order because, well, it's the release order. The release order is the chronological order. Help 1 and its Curse of Dreadbear DLC take place after FNaF 6 because plushies of Scrap Baby are in the game, a character from FNaF 6. Then after that, you want to play Security Breach. Security Breach takes place after Help Wanted because of a secret in Help Wanted showing the construction of the Pizzaplex, the place where this game takes place. And also the main antagonist and protagonist from the last game are in this game, but they'll hold off on the DLC at this point. Also, I would say after Security Breach, I would read the Tales from the Pizzaplex books because they're kind of necessary to understand what the fuck is happening in this game. But if you don't want to, then you can find summaries on YouTube. After you read Tales, play Help Wanted 2, since Help Wanted 2 happens after Security Breach, but it takes place before the events of Ruin, because the events of this game lead up to that DLC. And then after that, you can play Ruin. You know, that's the current final point in the timeline chronologically. Like I said earlier, I just played them in release order, but if you don't want to, then there you go. Fritz Smith is the secondary protagonist of Five Nights at Freddy's 2, being playable on Night 7 or Custom Night. Fritz takes over for the main protagonist, Jeremy Fitzgerald, and is then fired after only one night for tampering with the animatronics and odor. And that's the last we saw of Fritz. Just a one-off character to show Jeremy got moved to the day shift, right? Well, some people say no. Some people say Fritz is the main protagonist of the series up until FNaF 6, Michael Afton. Yeah, I'm sure you've heard of this theory before. It's one of the more popular theories because Matt Pat believed it in his 2017 timeline, and even still believed it up until his retirement. And Michael's a fan favorite character, and if it's in 2, he can't be Jeremy because it's implied he gets bit, and there's more pointing towards him being Fritz. I already made a video on this. It was my first theory, in fact, so you might be wondering, why are you making another one? Well, it's because I think I can go more in depth into why I believe this theory. My last one, it was good, but I only really used like 3 pieces of evidence, and I don't even agree with my explanation of the overall narrative in that video, and I'm gonna make the most definitive video on Mike Fritz ever, and prove Mike is Fritz. Until the Fritz game debunks it. First though, let's talk about who he's not. Phone Guy. Phone Fritz is a popular theory, mostly because Phone Guy is a fan favorite character and it would be nice to get a name for him and play as him, and I agree, I kinda wish Phone Fritz was true, but it's not. Why? Well, it's simple. Phone Guy said he would work the night shift when the place reopened, and it was not reopened during Night 7. There's also the fact that Fritz is fired, and in the logbook we learn about Fazbear Entertainment's policies of not hiring previous employees, so they probably wouldn't hire him back like I've seen some people say. And I just want to say, no, this isn't evidence against Mike Fritz, since Mike doesn't use the name Fritz in FNaF 1, and FNaF 1 takes place years after FNaF 2. He could look entirely different, or different enough to where he wouldn't be recognized. I also don't think Fritz is the father of Fritz, the MCI victim. My reasoning is pretty simple. The grave just says Fritz and not Fritz Jr., same reason I don't believe Jeremy is the father of the MCI
by Jeremy. I think if Scott wanted to tell us both the protagonists in FNaF 2 were fathers of William's victims, I don't see why he wouldn't simply ask the artist to add juniors to both their gravestones, especially in this final game meant to clear things up. There's also another Fritz theory that I actually think is really good, which is the theory that he's Henry. I want to make a whole video about that, so I'm not going to go in depth about it here, but I do think it's not true, but I think it's pretty good. Another theory that I think is likely, and I would believe if I didn't believe Mike Fritz, is the theory that Fritz is a Fredbear employee. Pretty good theory. Obviously I don't believe it though, because I believe Mike Fritz. With everyone he can't be out of the way, let's go into some of the evidence that he is Mike. Let's start with probably what is in my opinion the worst piece of evidence first, which is they have similar reasons for being fired. Now I don't think it's unfair to make a connection between these characters because of that, but logically they don't have to be the same person to have these same reasons for being fired. We know why Fritz has odor, and it's not because it's a corpse or anything, it's because he tampered with the animatronics, and we know the animatronics smell awful thanks to what Phone Guy said in this very game.
The idea at first was to repair them. They even started retrofitting them with some of the newer technology, but they were just so ugly, you know? And the smell.
And the newspapers in FNaF 1. So while this is like a fair piece of evidence, I don't think it's very good, and I kind of grown to hate it because it's the most popular piece of evidence, obviously. So whenever I see someone, you know, who doesn't believe Mike Fritz, they say, people only believe it because of this, when obviously that's not true, and I still have like another 20 minutes in this video. I feel like it's probably the worst piece of evidence. There's better evidence that you can use. It can be easily explained away as well. So yeah, now let's get into some better evidence, which is, of course, Fritz's name. Now let's just get this out of the way. Yes, Fritz's name is a combination of Mike Schmidt and Jeremy Fitzgerald's name. Fitz equals Fritz, and Smith is Schmidt in German. Actually, I wonder if that's Mike Jeremy evidence. Anyway, yeah, his name is a combination of that. But that doesn't mean his name couldn't have a different meaning now, especially his first name. Let's get the last name out of the way. Like I just said, Smith is Schmidt in German. Mike Schmidt is Michael's alias in FNaF 1, or he legally changed his last name to detach himself from William. Already a connection there. Now, Fritz's first name is the more interesting connection, in my opinion. Fritz is the same name as the kid who possesses Foxy, and Mike wore a Foxy mask when he killed his brother. And what's so great about this is Scott only made Fritz the name of the Foxy kid after FNaF 2 and 4, and after the theory of Mike being Fritz became popular. He could have made the name literally anything else, so why make it Fritz if we're not supposed to connect it back to Fritz Smith? He also included Jeremy's name, so obviously we're supposed to connect it back to FNaF 2. Unless Fritz's father is true, but then why have it be the Foxy kid? Why not Freddy or Bonnie? That's kind of a moot point now that I'm reading it out loud, you know, it could actually just be a coincidence, as opposed to what some people will have you say. Scott does do coincidences sometimes. So basically, when we simplify Fritz's name, basically Foxy Kid Schmidt, which I mean, come on, that's Mike, isn't it? Another piece of evidence is FNaF 6 ending. I know what you're thinking, right? Henry never hinted that Mike was Fritz in his speech, so what do you mean? And you're right, he didn't. But the visuals did. Notice how during Henry's speech, images from FNaF 1 and 2 fade in. Not on the monitor, they fade in over the whole screen, most likely implying these are the thoughts of our protagonist, who is all but confirmed to be Mike. And not only that, but these images are from the camera specifically, something only a guard could have seen. And also, notice how there are no FNaF 3 images? Maybe that's implying Mike isn't the FNaF 3 protagonist. There is just one problem with this though, and that is, this cutscene is 100% not from Michael's perspective, and I can prove it pretty easily. In-game, Michael passes out when the temperature reaches 120 degrees, yet in this cutscene, it goes up to 179. If this cutscene was from Michael's perspective, it would be like this.
Every tragedy should. And to you monsters,
Also, the monitor's just kind of like in a void. There's no fucking cup, there's no fucking paper. I don't even fucking know where this is. So since this cutscene isn't from Mike's perspective, that kind of throws out the whole point about the photos fading in. Maybe these are just supposed to be references to what Henry's talking about. But then again, why didn't they appear on the monitor itself? I mean, the fucking 8-bit minigames do. So why not these? I don't know. Another piece of evidence comes from the books, and actually the story Sea Bonnies. Please guys, hear me out on this one. I swear I'm not crazy. I swear this is good. I'm not looking into it too deep. I swear, please just hear me out. In the story, there is a fish named Fritz, who is eventually killed by the Sea Bonnies, who then use his body to move around, I guess. I don't know. I won't lie, guys. I just read the story for this video. And not only that, Fritz turns from, you know, the orange fish color to a blue color. Now, doesn't that sound kind of like a metaphor for when Mike got killed by Ennard, who used his body until it turned a purple color, but was actually blue at one point? It's pretty much just like when Ennard used Mike's body and then left it after it decayed, right? It's just like that, except it's a fish named Fritz. It's a very similar situation to Mike, so there could be a very good connection here. Similar situation, already a popular theory that Michael is Fritz. I don't know why I called out specifically that he was blue. I don't think the color actually matters. What matters is that it's like the same situation. Now, I'll admit,
At first I thought this was a weak piece of evidence because it came from Fritz and they reuse names all the time. I mean, they reuse the name Mike multiple times and only one of those guys is actually Michael Afton. Until I looked into it a bit more and I found out this is the only time the name Fritz is used in the books. In fact, it's the only time in the whole series it's reused besides the name for the MCI kid who can already connect back to Mike. Now this could be a coincidence. It would be a huge one, but it still could be one. I mean, we don't know what Scott told Andrea to write for this story. It's still an interesting connection, though. Although, obviously, the events of Mike being scooped and Fritz being killed are different. I do believe Scott did commission it, just because it would be such a huge coincidence. If Andrea just came up with the name, I do believe Scott probably told her to, do the name Fritz as a hint towards, Mike Fritz, right? But I feel like the immediate defense to that could be like, oh, it's just a reference to the theory. It doesn't actually mean anything. But I think if Scott did that, that would be incredibly shitty of him to do, basically. Because think about this book series. Fritz is meant to clear things up. It's meant to clear up things from the past. So they just reference the theory for basically no reason. No reason. There's not evidence towards anything. It's just reference. So that'd be not horrible. I was about to say horrible. It's not that deep, but it'd be pretty shitty to do. And I really don't see why Scott would do that. I do think there's gonna be something else we'll talk about later that I do think is just a reference. But this, I don't think it is. I just think it'd be incredibly shitty if it was. So that is why I do think this is important. I think this is probably the best piece of evidence for Mike Fritz, because it's literally basically just a character named Fritz going through a similar incident to Mike getting scooped. Different circumstances, right? But still, it's an obvious connection, right? Like different circumstances, same result, right? And also, let's take a look at FNaF 4, more specifically the Halloween update. This update introduced multiple new characters. However, a majority of them were deemed not canon until later in the series, except for one, Nightmare Balloon Boy. Nightmare Balloon Boy apparently fits in the story, but how? Well, we know that Michael is the protagonist of FNaF 4, having nightmares based on his past experiences at Freddy's. Wouldn't that mean he would have had to see Balloon Boy at some point to have nightmares about him? And I know what you're thinking. Balloon Boy could have existed before FNaF 2, or Mike could have seen him outside of the night shift. And that's all true, but it's still interesting that, Balloon Boy is the only canon FNaF 2 animatronic, and also even reuses the same voice lines too. Another possible explanation you could be thinking of is maybe Nightmare Balloon Boy was used in the experiments, right, and that's why it's canon, but the others aren't, they weren't used. However, I'm pretty sure the experiments did not exist when FNaF 4 came out. There's not really any reason to think they do. The experiments don't really impact the plot of FNaF 4 anyway, so I don't think that would be the explanation for why Nightmare Balloon Boy is canon. And also, let me explain why Nightmare Yawn and Nightmare Mangle are not canon to Mike's dreams if he worked at the FNaF 2 location. I mean, they should be able to fit just fine, right? Well, it's because they actually take over the role of characters in the main gameplay, with one taking over the role of the main antagonist. But Fun with Plushtrap is not the main gameplay, so I'm guessing that means Mike can either dream of Plushtrap or BB. And also, Nightmare Mangle should be able to fit in fine either way, because Mike's sister had a Mangle toy. Something else I just want to point out is that I've actually seen Nightmare BB used as evidence for Mike working in FNaF 3, since the main mechanic in that game is luring away Springtrap with Balloon Boy's voice lines, and he takes over Springtrap's role, well, Plushtrap, but let's be honest, Plushtrap is fucking Springtrap. So yeah, I just want to point that out, it's kind of interesting. Something else that I want to point out that I just found out recently is that the FNaF 4 bedroom actually has the same basic setup as the FNaF 2 office, 2 doors or vents, and then something in the middle, the hallway or the closet. Now, obviously, now that we know that gameplay was real, this doesn't really matter, but remember, like I said earlier, the experiments most likely did not exist in 2015, so there has to be an alternative explanation, and Mike working FNaF 2 and having dreams based off of the office could explain that. I don't know if it's no solid piece of evidence, but I want to throw it in there. Surprisingly, another piece of evidence comes from the FNaF movie. During Mike's first scene at Freddy's, he finds a tape left for him by William with his name on it. But Mike's name isn't the only name written. Faded behind his name is the name Fritz. And what's interesting is that Fritz isn't the guard before Mike, as revealed in the movie novel. The guy's name is Bob. Could this be a connection to Mike being Fritz in the games, with the original name on the tape being the name Mike originally went by before FNaF 1? It's at the very least a reference to the theory. Then again, this could mean Mike isn't Fritz, because obviously Fritz was a previous night guard in some capacity, even if it's not Bob. But like I said, definitely a reference, so Scott at least acknowledges the theory. With all my evidence stated, let's go over some problems with this theory. The age. If Mike was anything younger than 14 in 1983, let's say 12, he can't be Fritz, because you have to be at least 18 to work a night shift position. Wow, this is a huge problem, right? Well, no, not really. First of all, we don't know how old he was in FNaF 4, he could be 14. And also, if Mike is willing to lie about his name, he would be willing to lie about his age too. The next problem, why does Mike use the name Fritz Smith in FNaF 2, but every other time he works at Freddy's, he uses the name Mike Schmidt, as far as we know? There are a couple different explanations. There's a very good one that we'll talk about when we break down the narrative under this theory. So some of the ones that I don't think are as good
One of them that I came up with was that Fritz Smith is Mike's like legal name, but he didn't like it, so he changed it to Mike Schmidt by FNaF 1. Just like a dumb one. I don't really believe that. You know, maybe he just didn't want to be recognized, and then by FNaF 1 he felt confident enough that he used his first name instead of changing the whole thing. I don't know. I mean, the name Mike is not that uncommon, so him using it as a fake name and just changing his last name and still not wanting to be recognized isn't really that much of a stretch, you know. It's still a fake name. Maybe Mike was just feeling lazy during FNaF 1, who knows. Another idea, maybe he's honoring Fritz, the MCI victim. Now I'm saying that out loud, that doesn't really work because, you know, Fritz was not the name of the Foxy Kid during FNaF 2. Yeah, never mind, scratch that one's not that good. We'll talk about what I believe later. You know, I will admit, while editing this video, I did realize trying to find a reason for Mike to use a fake name that works during FNaF 2 when it came out is a little bit challenging. It doesn't really matter, I guess, because the evidence is there for Mike Fritz, for it to be true, so we just have to find the reason. So, I don't know what the explanation will be when FNaF 2 came out. Actually, wait, maybe the explanation for when FNaF 2 came out was, you know, Mike is already implied in FNaF 1 to have some kind of connection with the victims of the It's Me hallucinations. So, something like that. I don't know. I'm just spitballing. Yeah, I guess trying to find a reason for Mike to use a fake name is a little bit tricky. Doesn't really matter, the evidence is there. That's basically what I'm trying to say. Maybe he just didn't want to be recognized for whatever reason. I mean, his father did probably go on the run, so who knows. Another thing some people use to debunk Mike Fritz is that Mike gets fired for general unprofessionalism while Fritz doesn't. This is pretty easy to counter with the fact that Fritz only works 1 night while Mike works 7, so he would simply have more time to be unprofessional than Fritz. Although being unprofessional does seem to be one of Mike's characteristics, because it shows back up in the logbook, because the shit he fucking draws in the logbook is not professional. Speaking of the logbook, that's another thing people use to debunk Mike Fritz. The main thing here is that Mike doesn't actually reference FNaF 2 at all, and I thought this was a pretty huge problem too, until I realized Mike doesn't really reference FNaF 1 either. Sure, he draws FNaF 1 Freddy, but FNaF 1 Freddy is all over the place, and it might not even be Freddy. It could be Fredbear, who we learn at UCN looks basically exactly like FNaF 1 Freddy. And the only games Mike directly references are FNaF 4 and Sister Location, which makes sense, since Scott would have to clarify that Mike Schmidt is Michael Afton, who is also the FNaF 4 protagonist, and from there we can make the connection of Mike being Fritz. And then I guess the Fritz game could debunk this theory, but that's not fucking out yet, so who knows, it could confirm it too. And now we have to think about the big question, which is why? Why is Michael working as Fritz? Because, you know, it's one thing to just say a theory and lay out all the evidence. We also have to think about how it fits into the story. You can't just have characters doing stuff for no reason. I mean, you can, but it's not very satisfying. It has to fit somehow, so how does it? Well, there's 2 possibilities that I can see for Mike being Fritz. There's technically 3, the third of which is he just wanted a job, but that doesn't really make sense as to why he would change his name, and his alias is the first name of one of William's victims. That idea doesn't really work as well as the main 2. I still think it's a, you know, valid opinion, valid option, I just don't believe it. So let's talk about the main 2 ideas. Let's start with, in my opinion, the least likely of the 2. For this, we have to look at the FNaF 2 dream sequences. Not a lot of people pay attention to these cutscenes, which makes sense, they don't really matter to the story. But what if they do? There's a popular theory that these dreams are Mike's during FNaF 1. The animatronics are basically calling him back, kinda like in the movie. What if instead, these dreams actually take place during FNaF 2, and the animatronics are calling Mike for some reason? Maybe something to do with the bite victim, and then eventually Michael works at Freddy's because of these dreams. Pretty interesting idea, right? Yeah, it is, but I do have some problems with it. For one, why are they calling Mike to work at Freddy's now, when he hasn't worked there before as far as we know? And then why did they try to kill him on night 7 if they called him there? These problems just don't really make the idea work for me. I do believe Mike is the dreamer, for reasons I'll get to in another video, but still, you know, it relies on another theory to work. It's not as strong for me. The other idea, which I think is much stronger and works better, is that Mike was sent to the location not by the animatronics, but by William. Why? Well, I don't really know for sure. I'm just gonna say William wanted Mike to, like, watch the animatronics, see if the toys were possessed, because he couldn't tell on the day shift or something. That's just what I'm going with right now, but there are multiple different reasons. And maybe that's why Fritz already knows how to survive the night. You know, he already knows to put down the mask, wine at the box, flash Foxy, all that. And this could even be why Mike's alias is the name of an MCI victim. William gave him the name of one of his victims, and specifically the Foxy Kid, because Foxy is heavily applied to be Mike's favorite, since he wears a Foxy mask in FNaF 4. And you know, that's definitely something William would do. Unlike the last idea, this one actually has evidence. Well, kind of. It's mostly up for interpretation. FNaF 6, there is a poster that some people think is supposed to represent the Afton family. And on this poster, the man who represents William holds a puppet that looks like him, who is supposed to be Mike. This implies that William used Mike as a puppet. Could that imply that William sent Mike to Freddy's to do something, which is why he tampers with the animatronics? Maybe, although there are problems with this too. The poster could be about Sister Location, where William sent Mike, to put Elizabeth back together. Or this could be about the FNaF 6 antagonists. The man would be William, the puppet would be Lefty, the clown would be Baby, and the bear would be Freddy. And that's really the only piece of evidence for Mike accomplice, and it's already not the best. So now personally, I do think this is why Mike worked as Fritz, because I just think it's the most logical. This could even explain why in FNaF 1 he's just using his first name with a different surname or just his legal name. It's because it's not working under William's orders like in FNaF 2. The thing is with all these ideas is that they're kind of like too fan fiction-y, I guess. We need more information to find out why Mike is Fritz. Maybe we could get a game about it or something. Charlie Emily's murder is one of the most talked about events in the FNaF franchise, mostly because of the debate about who dies first, the bite victim or Charlie. But that's not what I'm talking about today. What I want to talk about is actually when Charlie dies, like the year. Most people agree that Charlie was William Afton's first murder, but is that true? That's what I want to talk about today. Basically, what year did Charlie die? 1983 or 1985? Before the MCI or after? And also, I know that technically Charlie can die in 1985 and before the MCI, but for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to be treating Charlie 85 as Charlie dying after the MCI. So 1983 means before, 1985 means after. First, let's talk about Charlie's death itself. We see this event twice. Once in FNaF 2 and an updated, more accurate version in FNaF 6. With these, we can figure out what's going on pretty easily. Late one night at a Fazbear location, Charlie Emily was locked outside by some kids. The security puppet, a machine designed to protect Charlie, was trapped under some boxes. Eventually, William drove up and killed Charlie, dragging her body into the alley. Conveniently, the security puppet managed to escape the box and went outside, flying, I guess. Then it found Charlie after William already drove away, and because of the rain, it malfunctions and lays down next to Charlie, and then Charlie possesses the puppet. Now that we're caught up to speed on the events of her death, let's talk about when she dies. Let's start with 1983 because it's the most popular theory. There's a lot of evidence for this, so let's get into it. First of all, there's of course the novels where Charlie dies in 1983 and is William's first victim. But to be fair, the novels are a different continuity with lots of differences. That's okay though, because there's plenty of evidence in the games. In Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, Henry says this:
"It keeps me awake at night. I could make myself sleep, but not yet. Not until I undo what he has done and heal this wound. A wound first inflicted on me, but then one that I let bleed out to cause all of this."
This implies that William killed Charlie first, because Henry said it was a wound first inflicted on him, you know. In Help Wanted 2, you can unlock the puppet memory by typing in 1983 on the keypad in the sister location office. Another piece of evidence is that when FNaF 2 came out, Scott said MatPat got almost everything right, and then later clarified one of the things he got wrong was Purple Guy being Phone Guy. In this video, Matt says that the kid who possessed the puppet was the first victim. More evidence is Give Gifts, Give Life, where the puppet is already possessed while the others are not. The main evidence for Charlie 85 comes from Help Wanted 2. In the Princess Quest 4 minigame, the order you have to do to unlock the secret Bonnie mask has Charlie as the last one you light up, with Chica being the first. This fits with Withered Chica's line in UCN.
I was the first. I have seen everything.
More evidence comes from Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, where during Charlie's death, posters can be seen which look like wanted posters. This person may be William. There's also Into the Pit, which has 6 victims in the MCI, the 6 of which may be Charlie. But I'm gonna be honest with you guys, this is totally Andrew. Fetcher's in the game, Fetcher's possessed by Andrew. There's a secret code in the game which spells out always watching, which is a phrase heavily connected with the vengeful spirit from UCN, who Andrew is in the Fazbear Fright book. This game is based off of Fazbear's Fright. So yeah, 6 bodies, definitely Andrew. So with all the evidence for both theories out of the way, let's talk about some problems with each of them. Charlie 83's big problem is the Princess Quest 4 graves, which seem to be the order the kids died in. Although that's not confirmed, there are alternate explanations for the graves. For example, they could be the order in which the spirits were freed. And if you look at the puppet's masks during Happiest Day, Charlie's mask falls the slowest and hits the floor last. And in the Stitch Ray Stingers, Charlie seems to be the last one to move on, sticking around until William dies. Charlie 85 has more problems. Henry's line. Now I have heard some possible explanations for this. One of which is that Henry's talking about Sammy and that William killed Sammy first in the games for some reason. I think this is unlikely because Henry never mentions Sammy, like directly, again, and William never killed Sammy in the novels. Another explanation is that Henry is referring to the MCI, and William did the MCI to ruin Freddy's brand, to hurt Henry, I think. Even though that's his company too, and he reuses the characters in personal projects, I don't think that one really works. Another huge problem is the way you get the puppet plush in Help Wanted 2. Now look, 1983 is a reference to Sister Location, I know that,
but the character specifically is the puppet, and I'm pretty sure that's on purpose. The MCI dies in 1985, but if the code didn't really matter, they could have had any other character be the plushie you get for this code, or find some other way to get the plush. But they didn't. They specifically chose the puppet, and I believe that was intentional to show Charlie died in 1983. Another huge problem with Charlie 85 is, of course, Give Gift his life. Charlie is already possessing the puppet, but none of the other ones are possessed. Although I have seen some people say that they just weren't possessed until Charlie did whatever she did in Give Gift his life. So she was possessed first but died last. That's possible, I guess. I don't really have anything. You know, that's valid. So, as you can probably tell, I do believe it's Charlie 83. I think the evidence for it is much stronger. Henry's line makes more sense, and overall, it makes more sense with what we know about William's character from the novels, where he only did the MCI to recreate what happened with Charlie. Obviously, the motive in the game has to be different because of the bite victim and stuff, but yeah. Also, in the movies, William killed someone before the MCI, Garrett. Also, something else worth pointing out is that in the novels, Charlie didn't originally die in 1983, she died in 1982. Now, why would Scott retcon this for absolutely no reason, unless it carried over to the games as well, and that is also when Charlie died in the games. Not 1982, not 1985, but 1983. He changed it in the novels to line up better with the games, which would be odd because the novels are literally separate continuity. If he wanted to show Charlie died in 1983 for sure, he would retcon it in the novels just to show it happened, right? I think that's probably one of the best pieces of evidence for not only Charlie dying in 1983, but probably also bite victim first, because think about it. If Charlie died in 1982, she could die before the bite victim just fine, but if she doesn't, then... But for some reason, Scott felt the need to retcon to 1983, which would really only make sense if the bite victim died first. So I guess we're doing a whole death timeline in this video, but yeah, I do believe Charlie died in 1983. Honestly, guys, I would be more surprised if Charlie died after the MCI. It really seems like she dies before. But Midnight Motorist, we all know what Midnight Motorist is. It has often been called the most confusing FNaF minigame, and for good reason. You know, I told myself I would never make a Midnight Motorist video unless something huge happened that made me feel like I had to talk about it. And guess what? That's right, something huge happened, and it pointed towards the two versions of Midnight Motorist I actually like narratively, which gave me the motivation I needed to talk about it. Before we get into that, I do have to give a mandatory recap of the Midnight Motorist minigame. Don't worry, I'll try to make it quick. It starts with us, the player, driving a purple car through the rain. We drive for a bit before coming to this place in the woods with some kind of mound, which is called a grave in the Ultimate Guide. The Ultimate Guide is a little bit of an unreliable source though, so we don't know for sure if it's a grave, but I have no idea what else it could be. Also, we learn that the Midnight Motor is a yellow person. We then drive to this place called Junior's, which seems to be a bar or a restaurant. It could be Freddy's, like a Fredbear's Jr. or something, which would make the green guy being Henry more likely. But since 5 laps at Freddy's doesn't have any indication that it's Freddy's, I think it's safe to say that's a random place that doesn't matter. Something interesting to note is that the yellow guy isn't allowed in the building for some reason. Driving more takes us to the yellow guy's house, which looks very similar to the FNaF 4 title screen house. Going inside, we see a person wearing a gray blanket or something, watching TV. They're telling us to leave him alone tonight. Him seems to be the yellow man's son. Going to his room, we knock on the door, telling him to open it, but he doesn't, and then the yellow man gets pissed off and we storm outside. Going outside, we see an interesting scene. A broken window, shadowed footprints, and one set of animatronic footprints. Something they call out is that the animatronic footprints don't go up to the window, they don't move at all. Seeing this, the yellow man says he ran off to that place again and he'll be sorry when he gets back. With the recap of Midnight Motorist out of the way, let's talk about what made me want to make this video in the first place. Recently, a demo for the Five Nights at Freddy's racing game, 5 Laps at Freddy's, was released, and I'm 99.9% sure this game is a Trojan horse to confirm what Midnight Motorist is about. Not only is the Midnight Motorist track with this section of the minigame in the game, but the logo for the game has the same rainbow pattern as the original FNaF 6 teasers. The thumbnail of the trailer is of Junior's, and above all else, this game seems to confirm who the yellow man is. On the car called the Midnight Motor, which is the same car used in Midnight Motorist, there's an antenna with Spring Bonnie on it. This basically confirms that William Afton himself is the yellow guy. The only way it could get more obvious is if Scott himself came out and said, yellow guy is William Afton. And honestly, looking back, it was kind of obvious. Not only were we driving a purple car, much like William drove in FNaF 2, but the house looks like the title screen house from FNaF 4. The yellow guy also seems to have the same kind of, you know, neck thing going on that William has in FNaF 2 and 3, although to a lesser extent. Not only that, but FNaF 6, William is already connected to the color yellow with Fruity Maze, where one of his text colors is yellow. However, there is still one question. Why is William yellow? Why not purple like every other time we've seen him, besides in FNaF 2 he was pink for some reason? Well, we don't know for sure and most likely never will. However, the explanation I like is that in Midnight Motorist, we're playing as William and viewing everything from his perspective. He doesn't see himself as a man in the shadows, he just sees himself as, you know, a guy. It's also probably something to do with Mic Trap, right? People thought that purple guy was literally purple, so Scott would be showing, no, he isn't. He's, can be any color. So it seems that Midnight Motors is about William Afton himself, and honestly, I'm happy with that. Afton MM has always been my favorite, even if I didn't believe it for a few months there. However, even if we only have one thing confirmed, there's still a lot left to speculate about, like the entire rest of the minigame. The big questions are who the runaway is, who the couch person is, who the animatronic footprints belong to, what the mound is, when the minigame takes place, and where the runaway ran off to. There's also juniors, but I already talked about what I think that is in the recap. I'll try my best to tackle each of these individually, but there will be some overlap with some of them. I also want to discuss how Midnight Motors changes the story, not just what it is. Well, I guess it really only changes the story if the crying child is the runaway, because it would retcon a pretty big thing from FNaF 4. But Mike being the runaway adds some context to the character motivations, which changes our perception of the story, so I guess the clickbait still works. So now that we're finally done with the intro, let's try to answer all the questions Midnight Motorist provides to us and explain how it changes the story. Let's talk about the easiest question to answer first, when this minigame takes place. As we know, this minigame is called later that night in the files, but after what? Well, this is where we can use the unused description for the Midnight Motor car to help us out. Talk about a killer ride. This smooth cruiser is the perfect choice for anyone wanting to flee a crime scene and win a race. Now, obviously this was removed, but still, it does show what they're going for with the car, at least so far. Using this, we know that during Midnight Motorist, William was driving away from a crime scene, which puts us to the minigame at 3 possible points. After Charlie's murder in 1983, after the MCI in 1985, and after the DCI in 1987. Both 83 and 87 have good evidence. 1985 doesn't really have anything. For 1983, during Midnight Motorist, the same rain graphics as the security puppet minigame are used. And as we know, William drove away after killing Charlie. This implies that the minigame is after Charlie's murder. This makes a lot of sense if you think about it. FNaF 6 was made to clear things up. So the minigame would confirm who dies first, depending on who the runaway is. If BV is the runaway, it confirms Charlie first. If Mike's the runaway, it confirms Bite victim died first. I know technically Charlie can die first with Mike being the runaway, but I don't really think that makes sense, because what would this minigame be clearing up then? 1987's evidence is that on the Midnight Motor car, there are dice with 2 numbers, 8 and 7, which we obviously can connect back to 1987. This is actually really good evidence. It could theoretically be a random reference, but this car had to have been approved, right, by Scott, and it's already very lore heavy with the spring body antenna. So I'm not sure if Scott would want to put in a random throwaway reference. So does MM take place in 1983 or 1987? Well, the one thing I can say for sure is that Charlie did not die in 1987. A lot of people thought that MM being in 1987 means that, but it really doesn't. MM just wouldn't be after Charlie's death. I wrote the script before we knew about the die, so for the rest of the video I will be operating on the assumption MM is in 1983, but don't worry 1987ers, I'll explain why I think the minigame would be about if it takes place then too. Let's talk about the animatronic footprints outside the window. There are 2 possibilities I see for this that fit with the shape of the footprints. Shadow Freddy and Golden Freddy, possessed by the Bite victim. I've also seen the idea that it could be a Scarecrow since William doesn't react to the footprints, but we have no reason to believe that a Scarecrow-type character exists, so I doubt it. William probably didn't react to the footprints because he didn't notice them, or Scott didn't feel the need to have William react to them. Let's talk about Golden Freddy first. The evidence for this is that in the movie, Golden Freddy leaves the pizzeria and goes to Mike's house to take Abby. The footprints being Golden Freddy could explain why there's only one set. As we know, Golden Freddy can teleport, and there's only one set of footprints, meaning the animatronic never walked anywhere. I'm sure you guys can see the connection. Furthermore, the week before seems to confirm that the crying child is somehow connected to Golden Freddy, with him crying right before Ralph is killed by an animatronic who is most likely Golden Freddy. He would be going to Mike's room to try and get him out to go somewhere, probably Freddy's or the mound. The problem with Golden Freddy being the footprints is that we don't know what level of control crying child has over Golden Freddy. And also, I'm not sure if the movie is the best evidence because the situations are completely different. I like this interpretation, although I am going to have to disagree with it. Now let's talk about Shadow Freddy, who seems to be the footprints of Midnight Motorist, and how much this game connects Shadow Freddy and Charlie. In the opening minigame, Shadow Freddy is there blocking Freddy as he tries to give kids pizza. The opening minigame is actually a recreation to Take Cake to the Children, the first time we saw Charlie's murder. We know this because the FNaF 6 teasers have Cake Bear turn into the same Freddy sprite as the opening minigame, so there's already a connection there. Let's turn to Charlie's vessel in this game, Lefty. I am 99.9% sure Lefty is supposed to be referenced to Shadow Freddy. Why? Because it seems very likely that all the antagonists of FNaF 6 represent the main antagonists of FNaF 1 to 5. Molten Freddy is possessed by the spirits of the MCI, FNaF 1, Scrap Baby's baby, sister location. William is FNaF 3, and Lefty is both FNaF 2 with the puppet and FNaF 4 with the actual animatronic. The animatronic of Lefty is a black bear, much like the antagonist of FNaF 4, Nightmare. And Nightmare is Shadow Freddy, as we learn in the game files, and that much like Shadow Freddy, he is a Fredbear recolor. Speaking of being related to Golden Freddy, Lefty has Golden Freddy's role of being the odd one out of the rest of the group. And again, Shadow Freddy is a Golden Freddy recolor. So I'm very confident Lefty is supposed to represent Shadow Freddy. He's connected to Charlie somehow. So wouldn't it make sense for him to show up in a minigame related to Charlie's death, which is what Midnight Motorist is, unless it takes place in 1987. And I can't think of any other problems with Shadow Freddy being the footprints, so I'm 95% sure Shadow Freddy's the footprints. But now we must ask, where is he taking them? I guess we can also ask why. It's probably agony or something, I guess. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. there are only 3 options I can see for where the runaway ran off to. The mound, Junior's, Freddy/Fredbear's. Something important to note is that the runaway has ran off to this place multiple times. I think we can safely say Junior's isn't where the runaway ran off to. Like I said, it seems to be a bar. I doubt they would let a kid in there in the middle of the night. Also, there's not any other hints that this is where the runaway ran off to. The mound is the next option, but honestly, I don't think the runaway ran off here either. I think this is because there are no footprints near the mound or in the area at all. You could make an argument that the runaway just hasn't arrived at the mound yet, but I feel like if Scott wanted us to know the runaway ran off here, he would have included some sort of clue, but he really didn't. Not Junior's, and it's not the mound, so that leaves Freddy's. I don't think it's just some random place that we haven't been introduced to that makes no sense. So I'm guessing that Shadow Freddy brought the runaways to Freddy's for some reason. Maybe he wanted to get the agony from the runaway, or maybe he wanted to recreate Charlie's murder, since it does seem that he recreates William's actions. So now we know when the minigame takes place, who the footprints are, and where the runaway ran off to. Now we have to get into the much more complicated questions. The runaway, couch person, and the mound. Let's start with the runaway and couch person since they go hand in hand. Identifying the runaway and the couch person is key to figuring out what this minigame is about. Let's take a look at couch person's design and what they're doing. They're wearing gray and are watching TV, and let's be honest, this is very similar to Michael Afton, who in FNaF 4 wore gray, spoke in gray, and sister location watched TV between nights. Michael being couch person would mean the runaway's crying child. Crying child being the runaway would mean that he saw Charlie's corpse. This could be what he saw in FNaF 4 that made him fearful of the animatronics. While Mike being the couch person makes sense by looking at the couch person, the rest of the minigame, taking that into account, is kinda weird. And I'm not talking about the couch person defending the crying child, even though in FNaF 4 Mike bullies him. That can make sense. It would be weird for Mike to bully his brother even after he saw a child's corpse. If we look at the runaway's behavior, it doesn't fit with what we know about the crying child. He would not follow an animatronic who was outside his window. He probably wouldn't lock his door either. With what we've seen from him, he would most likely curl up in a ball and cry. You could argue that this is before he saw what he saw, with under him being the runaway would be Charlie's corpse. It's a fair argument, but there's a problem. We know the crying child saw something in the shadows that he misinterpreted, and there's nothing to misinterpret about a dead girl in an alley. Some people think he could have seen the scene as the puppet killing Charlie, which then explain why he's scared of the animatronics, but he isn't scared of the puppet, he's scared of, the actual animatronics. Crying child seeing Charlie's corpse would be a retcon that is useless. Like I said, it doesn't really fit his personality. In fact, the runaway fits Mike's personality better, as Mike has seen to be fearless, basically. Not fearless, but he is willing to do the stuff he does in Midnight Motorist. He would follow an animatronic outside his window. Also, can we bring up the house? This is not the FNaF 4 minigame house. This fits with the FNaF 4 title screen house much better. And the title screen house isn't the FNaF 4 minigame house either, meaning it kind of has to be Mike's house, because we play as Mike in FNaF 4, why else would this random house be there on the title screen? Literally has the nightmares following the protagonist home. If crying child was the runaway, that means that the Aftons moved closer to the place that William didn't want the crying child going to for basically no reason. At least under Mike being the runaway, there's some sort of reason for the move. They moved to get out of the public eye after the crying child's death. And it's the house Mike will live in until his adult years. Hell, even if it's not the FNaF 4 house, it would still make sense for them to move under Mike being the runaway. Also, Mike being followed home or an animatronic invading Mike's house is sort of a theme in the series. In FNaF 4, he was followed home by something. In the non-canon sister location ending, he's followed home by Ennard, so Mike being followed home in MM would just make sense. Especially with Shadow Freddy going to Mike's house. That is basically the plot of FNaF 4's gameplay. Midnight Motorist would be setting up that plot point after it already happened, but still. There's just one huge problem with Mike being the runaway, which is couch person. I don't care what anyone says, Mike being couch person is a reasonable conclusion. I mean, who else could it be if not Mike? There's only one person it can be, and that is Mrs. Afton, which I know sounds like a stretch, but hear me out. We know that Mike already looks like William, and they have multiple narrative parallels, right? So if Mike already takes after one parent, would it not be unreasonable to assume he takes after the other? And that's why couch person has a lot of Mike connections. Mike takes after his mom in personality, interests, and other things. This works well if you believe that the Immortal and the Restless is about Mrs. Afton and William, because in the logbook, Mike says he relates to Clara, which would be his mom's representation. Now, I think the Immortal and the Restless is just about Mike and William, but I do think it's possible that it's about both Mrs. Afton and Mike, and the show just represents multiple things. But still, I thought it was worth bringing up. Also, Mike being the runaway makes sense since Mike is actually relevant to FNaF 6. Alright, let's talk about the mound now. The mound is arguably the most mysterious part of this minigame. We don't even know what it is for sure. What we do know, for sure, is that it is important and not just a random thing that was thrown in like I've seen some people say. Come on guys, Scott makes dumb decisions, but I don't think he would add a random mound for no reason. So what is it? Well, it's probably a grave, since that's what the Ultimate Guide calls it. So whose grave? That depends on who you believe the runaway is. Or does it? Because I think we could safely say that this is the crying child's grave. Why? Well, it's kind of simple. You have to play Midnight Motorist to unlock the secret grave ending, with the graves of all the important kids who have died in the series, although there is a noticeable lack of the crying child here. That's because we already saw his grave in Midnight Motorist, unmarked, so we wouldn't know his name because Scott wants to be mysterious about it for some reason. I didn't pull this out of nowhere. In FNaF World, there are 6 graves all together right next to each other. These are most likely supposed to be William's victims since they are right next to Purple Guy. However, if you walk a little, you will find a 7th hidden grave near Fredbear, who's connected to the crying child. It's pretty much showing that their graves are separated, right? I'm pretty sure this is the crying child's grave. He's separated from the rest because he wasn't killed by William. So yeah, I think it's safe to say the mound is the crying child's grave. Now you might be wondering, why is the grave in the middle of the woods and not a cemetery? And that's a good question. We can only speculate. Private burials are legal, but why would William bury him close by? My best guess is that he kept it nearby to experiment. It seems very likely that William is the final speaker of FNaF 4. And he said he will put the crying child back together, so he would have to have access to his body to figure out how to do that. There's also that one Curse of Dreadbear level where we experiment on Dreadbear who may represent the crying child, but I'm not really sure if he does. The other options for the mound are Elizabeth and Mrs. Afton, but Elizabeth probably doesn't die first for multiple reasons that I won't get into today, and Mrs. Afton is a good explanation for CC being the runaway, but unlike CC being the mound, there isn't any evidence for her being the mound that I know of. Alright, and let's recap, because that was a lot. I believe Midnight Motorist is about Mike running away to Freddy's after being lured by Shadow Freddy. He broke his window, or Shadow Freddy broke it, it doesn't really matter. Mrs. Afton is couch person. There are problems with this, of course, but it's the same problem with every MM theory, which is that we have to assume a lot of things. I hope I explained my reasoning in a way that you guys can at least see where I'm coming from. Now that we're done with this boring evidence stuff, let's talk about how it affects the actual interesting thing in the narrative. Mike being the runaway and seeing Charlie's corpse could affect the story in a few ways. The most simple is that it gives Mike a personal connection to Charlie, which makes sense considering Mike has a personal connection to every other antagonist at FNaF 6. Molten Freddy killed him, and William and Elizabeth are his family. The odd one out would be Charlie. Even if you think Mike is Fritz from FNaF 2, I still wouldn't say they have a personal connection. So Mike seeing Charlie's corpse would give them a personal connection. Now let's talk about what else Mike seeing Charlie might connect to. Michael's motivations. If we look back at the Immortal and the Restless, Clara, who I already talked about earlier, represents Mike in some way. He's constantly asking Vlad, who is either William or Fazbear Entertainment, to take responsibility for the baby, which is probably all the crimes at Freddy's. I've always assumed this minigame was showing what happened after FNaF 1. However, what if it had instead been happening in 1983 when William killed Charlie? Mike is accusing William of killing children much earlier than I thought, at least. And maybe you guys too. I don't know what you believe. This could be why he worked at Freddy's. He didn't work there for free pizza. He wanted to know the truth about what happened. This would technically be a retcon with like Crying Child seeing Charlie's corpse, but unlike that, it wouldn't contradict anything. Also, something else to think about. Crying Child was always scared of being hurt or killed at Freddy's, right? After seeing something that we know may be innocent, but he thought was dangerous. We can assume Mike made fun of this fear because, let's be honest, it was unreasonable. However, well, actually, I guess it wasn't considering what happened to him. If Mike did see Charlie's corpse, he would be put in the crying child's position, much like in FNaF 4, where he is a scared child, scared of the animatronics. You know, that's some good writing right there. Seeing something dangerous at Freddy's, unlike whatever the crying child saw, this is a real threat and a real thing that happened. He would find out that his brother wasn't so crazy after all. Furthermore, Mike seeing Charlie's corpse would show that Michael has always been connected to William's crimes, which is just neat. Not a huge narrative thing with that, I just think it's cool. And those are all the ways I can think about how my interpretation of Midnight Motorist affects the story. Now let's talk about if it's in 1987. If it's in 1987, it would have to take place right after the DCI. I know there's a problem with the description saying William fled the scene and then saved them. He's not really running, he's still there. I guess you could say he fled after he killed them or after he cleaned up, right? The footprints would either be Shadow Freddy or Golden Freddy, and Mike would run away to Freddy's for reasons I talked about earlier. I'm assuming they brought him there to see the DCI's bodies. Why? Well, it depends. If it's Shadow Freddy, he's doing it for agony, I guess. And if it's Golden Freddy, I think he wants Mike to help the DCI or save them. Do you guys get it? Because it's what the minigame is called in FNaF 2. I think Golden Freddy makes more sense under Midnight Motorist being in 1987, although Shadow Freddy does have the FNaF 4 parallels, so it's probably him. Alright, that's what the minigame is about, but why? Why do we need to know Mike saw the DCI? What does that clear up? Well, I think I know, guys, and you guys might think I'm crazy, but I think it's Mike being Fritz. I mean, think about it. Mike followed a bear standing outside his window to Freddy's where he saw 5 dead kids. Wouldn't you want to figure out what's going on as soon as possible? This minigame will explain why Mike worked at Freddy's. He's trying to figure out what's going on, kind of like what I talked about earlier, and showing why he's there at FNaF 2. This also ties into the Immortal and Restless because, again, the whole plot there is Mike asking William to explain everything, right? This can even explain why Mike is using aliens in FNaF 2. He might be a witness in the DCI case, and he probably couldn't work there as a witness, so he uses a fake name. The same name as one of the missing children. Basically, MM being in 1987 would still explain Michael's motivations and debunk Mike's accomplice while also giving great evidence to Mike Fritz, or at least making it make sense. I might just have to start believing this. If you've watched my channel, you probably know I am a huge defender of the Mike Fritz theory. You know, the theory that Michael Afton is Fritz Smith from FNaF 2, which is a theory that practically everyone believes. I've made 2 videos going over this theory and why I believe it, one of which took me months to make. However, I don't believe it anymore.
That's right, Mike Fritz's biggest defender is no longer defending it. You might be wondering, what made you stop believing this theory? And well, I admit it might be nothing, but I'm pretty certain it probably is something. Recently, I was looking through the survival logbook. While I was looking through the book, I noticed something. As we all know, Foxy acts as the security guard in this book, almost definitely representing Mike, but we'll talk about that later. But I know something else. He isn't the only security guard. There are two more. Bonnie and Freddy are also shown to be security guards. This, to me, seems to imply that there are 3 security guards that you play as in the games. Why? Well, here's what we have to remember. The logbook is basically an add-on for FFPS, made to confirm who the 6th grade student is, lore keeper ending. As we know, FFPS was made to clear things up, and I see no reason why this wouldn't carry over to the logbook as well. For example, this book clears up if Mike is the Foxy bro or the bite victim by having Mike be represented by Foxy and having the bite victim talk throughout. It also clears up that Mike is the one we play as in FNaF 4. I think the logbook was basically supposed to clear up things FFPS couldn't, or at the very least it does have lore relevant details in it. And because of that, I think having 3 security guards was an intentional detail requested by Scott. I think the third one is Fritz, since the logbook already has Foxy, who is Mike, as the FNaF 3 guard, so the FNaF 3 guard is already represented. And let me explain why we know Foxy definitely represents Mike and not Phone Guy, who is named Ralph if you didn't know, as revealed in the week before. Foxy representing Ralph is a kind of a popular idea. I mean, Foxy being Mike is definitely more popular, but I still see Ralph every once in a while. The evidence for Ralph is that in FNaF 2, Ralph says Foxy is his favorite, which is reinforced in the week before. Also, some of the quotes on the night pages are similar to stuff Phone Guy would say. You know, what are you still doing here? Whatever else he says, I forgot. And Ralph being in the FNaF 3 office kinda makes sense because his tapes were played in FNaF 3. Just ignore that he wasn't a night guard when those tapes were recorded. However, I think it's more likely Foxy is supposed to be Mike, and here's why. Foxy acts as the protagonist of the book, which Mike is. You know, he's the one who writes it and everything. The best evidence for Foxy being Mike is that on the first night page, Foxy is seen reading a magazine in a chair, which is obviously not an office chair, implying this is at Foxy's home and is applying for the job. The magazine is also a sister location reference. It's a Screw Bolts and Hairpins magazine, which was a magazine mentioned in sister location as one of the possible reasons Mike took the job. I guess this is showing how Mike got the job at Freddy's, you know, via this magazine. Which Freddy's? Take your pick. Also, something else to call out is that on the cover, there are 2 Freddys. Could this be another Jeremy and Fritz reference? You know, they were the night guards before Mike, and it's like where you got the night shift, I don't know. They do wear Freddy masks in FNaF 2. Like I said, I don't know. Anyway, yeah, it's pretty likely Foxy is Mike and not Ralph. And again, this makes sense since Scott would want to clarify, you know, Mike is the Foxy bro, not the bite victim. And especially when you remember that this book also confirms Mike is the FNaF 4 player. So it's definitely possible Scott considered people would be confused and think Mike is the bite victim, which did end up happening. So clearly, you know, whatever you want to do didn't actually work. The reason I think Freddy and Bonnie are supposed to be Jeremy and Fritz is simply because they're the other 2 security guards in the series that we play as, at least. And also, they're in a pair, and Jeremy and Fritz are like a pair, right? They're the 2 security guards we play as in FNaF 2. There's never been another game where we have 2 protagonists. Unless you want to count the minigame. But yeah, Jeremy and Fritz are basically a pair. Bonnie and Freddy are a pair, and they're both security guards. I think there's a connection. There might even be a deeper connection. As we know, the missing kid named Jeremy possesses Bonnie. Now the missing kid Fritz doesn't possess Freddy, he possesses Foxy. But obviously Foxy can't be used to represent Fritz, since Foxy is already used for Mike. Freddy is the next best option since Fritz wears a Freddy mask in FNaF 2. Also, fun fact, Fritz is actually short for Frederick, and Freddy is also a nickname for Frederick. Although, I'm gonna be real, Scott did not consider this. If you did, why wouldn't Fritz MCI be Freddy? I'm pretty sure Fritz Smith is Freddy because, you know, Freddy's the next best option to represent him after Foxy. Bonnie and Freddy are also the other 2 male animatronics in the band. So, unfortunately, Fritz Smith being a girl is debunked, so fuck you, Scott Cawthon. So yeah, Fritz Smith is not Michael Afton. But it seems like Mike is the FNaF 3 guard, since, you know, Foxy's in the FNaF 3 office. If you believe the theory that Fritz Smith is the phone dude, you could use this part of the logbook where Freddy is talking to Foxy in the FNaF 3 office as evidence for it, I guess. Because, you know, that's what phone dude would do, basically, like, talk to Mike on the phone. Obviously, Freddy's not on the phone, but, you know, kind of connection, I guess. But I'm always going to be a hardcore Cassie's dad phone dude truther. There's just one thing that makes me doubt Mike being the guard in 3, and that is Hudson Foster's existence. In case you don't know who this is, Hudson is the main protagonist of the Fazbear's Fright story, What We Found. He is a security guard for Fazbear's Fright. He killed his abusive stepdad and his mom in a house fire when he was younger. During his night shift, he goes up against Springtrap while facing hallucinations caused by him. In the end, Hudson burns alive in an oven. Go watch my FNaF 3 guard breakdown video. I explain What We Found a lot better than that. This is just a quick rundown. So you might be wondering, what about this makes you doubt Mike being the guard? Remember, Fazbear's Frights was made to fill in blanks from the past. Scott said this, and he even said it will go against things the community likes. Andrew's the one who shot killed that. And then we have a whole story about a night guard at a horror attraction, Fazbear's Fright, who encounters Springtrap, and the book even gives Hudson fire-related trauma, which could explain why the phantoms are burnt in FNaF 3. Why would this be written if it wasn't trying to say this guy Hudson was the guard? And even if it's in a new continuity, it's not uncommon for characters to carry over from the book to the games, you know, like Henry or Charlie. Or in the movie, Mike is still Mike. He's still the FNaF 1 guard, Mike. Even though the movie has completely different events to the game, that is still the same character, Mike Schmidt from FNaF 1. So it is possible that Hudson Foster is still Hudson Foster from FNaF 3, even with what we found numerous differences between it and FNaF 3. You know, for instance, the building doesn't burn down, Hudson dies on his first night against Springtrap, and a lot more stuff too. So why does the story exist, if not to show Hudson as the guard? Well, I'm not sure, but I have a couple ideas. You guys might not know this, but FNaF 3 is one of Scott's favorite games, so it's possible he just want to write a story based off of it. It could have also been made to explain the Phantoms, but with a different protagonist than the one in the game. I mean, the Phantoms Hudson's experiences are different. They're not burnt, and he hears his abusive stepfather's voice along with other voices. Compares to FNaF 3 where that doesn't happen. Then we come to Hudson himself. Why would he exist if he isn't the guard? What stopped Scott from just writing the book about Mike? Some people say it might have been too complicated to make the story about Mike, which is true, but still, you know, Scott definitely could have done it. So why would Hudson exist if he's not the guard? And honestly, I'm not sure. But it's not the first time a new character has taken over the role of another in a different continuity. For example, Michael Brooks is Golden Freddy in the novels, while he isn't in the games. There's also Abby. She takes the role of Mike's younger sister in the movies, which Elizabeth is in the games, but Abby's probably not Elizabeth. These characters replace characters from the game's continuity because they fit the story Scott wanted to tell better. Could this apply to Hudson? Maybe, but at the same time, there's a possibility that both FNaF 3 and What We Found are canon. What do I mean? You guys know how both the Into the Pit short story and Into the Game are canon, but the game is probably the actual events. The same may be true with What We Found. And while the Into the Pit story and game have some massive differences, changing the protagonist seems a bit much. But then again, what I just said, we don't even know if that's true, it's just an idea. You know, the difference is Into the Pit is a game based off a book, What We Found is a book based off of a game. So, you know, it is kind of a different situation. All of this points towards Hudson. But then the logbook literally has Mike in the FNaF 3 office. And I've yet to hear a good defense for this besides, it's just a mistake, but I doubt that. The office shows up multiple times, even in non-night related sections. I'm sure Scott would have noticed that at some point, and, you know, he could have said like, oh no, wrong office. I think you guys seriously underestimate how much Scott does actually check this stuff. Like, he would notice eventually that Mike was in the FNaF 3 office. He would have to check over his own book. And this book already confirms a lot of stuff. Mike Schmidt being Michael Afton, Michael being the FNaF 4 protagonist, Golden Freddy's name, and that's just off the top of my head. And if we can use the drawing of the puppet giving a little girl cake on the page that mentions Happiest Day as evidence that the Golden Freddy kid in Happiest Day is Cassidy, and that Cassidy's a girl in the games, it's only fair that Foxy being in the FNaF 3 office is evidence that Mike is the FNaF 3 guard. And that goes vice versa, by the way. I've also seen some people say that logbook being meta means this is irrelevant, but I don't really see how. If anything, it even makes more sense. It's since the logbook is a meta book meant to confirm lore, then Mike being the FNaF 3 office should basically be confirmation. But then again, Hudson's mere existence puts a hole in this theory. And then I seem like a hypocrite because I believe Andrew is the one you should not have killed in the games, right? But some people say, oh, you know, it's just like a stand-in for Cassidy. I guess there is a difference between Andrew and Hudson, though. There was actual stuff in UCN to imply there was this new 7th spirit. And also, Andrew's story is clearly after UCN, while Hudson's story is like an alternate continuity type of thing, you know? Although there is the possibility that What Found is canon and that it's like a prequel to FNaF 3, which I would just love to be the case. I really think that'd be some great world building, but, you know, I do think it's unlikely. But I have seen some ideas that maybe it's a sequel and like Eleanor or Springtrap, which I actually like too. But, you know, I doubt either of those, unfortunately. So yeah, I guess it is a little bit different, but still. And, you know, there are other problems with Mike being in FNaF 3. In FFPS, William says this:
You may not recognize me at first, but I assure you, it's still me.
Some people use this line to say Mike couldn't be in FNaF 3 because why wouldn't he recognize Afton? But here's the thing we have to remember. This is Afton's line, not Mike. Afton looks different than he did in FFPS, so he is considering that maybe Mike won't recognize him. We don't know if Mike does or not. Although we definitely should, because, you know, he's the main character of this game. He doesn't like do anything. I don't know why Scott chose to have the main character not really like do anything, or like we don't learn his thoughts about what's happening in the game where he dies. But that's a video for a whole nother day. Oh, so we can pretty confidently say Afton does look different in universe. Nako said that Scrabtrap's redesign is classified as a lore question by Scott, which most likely means there's a lore reason for it. And everyone else in this game has a canon explanation for the redesign, so why wouldn't William? So yeah, Mike may not recognize William, but it's still Springtrap. I just feel like this line is probably talking
talking to the player, basically saying that even though Springtrap looks different, it's still Springtrap. This especially makes sense when we remember that Mike Trap was a big debate at the time of this game's development, so this line would basically serve to debunk that theory. Some people also take issue with Michael's speech and sister location, saying that setting up William and Michael's meeting in FFPS, not showing the outcome of their meeting for FNaF 3, which is the most common interpretation of this cutscene. Now, I do agree this is setting up FFPS, but could it not be serving a double purpose? Showing the outcome of Michael finding his father while also showing that they're going to meet again in FFPS? Maybe that's why, and this is a stretch, Mike says, I'm going to come find you twice, because he's going to find Afton twice. But yeah, like I said, that's a stretch. He probably just said, I'm going to come find you twice, because just saying it once sounds kind of unnatural. So, you know, this is like where I was wherever I made that Fright Guard video. I'm still, you know, pretty in between. I'm confident Mike is the guard, and I guess Hudson could be his own independent character in his own continuity. He just isn't Mike because Scott didn't want to rev up Mike for some reason. But, you know, at the same time, Scott did say Frights was made to clear up things from the past, fill in the blanks, and then you have the story about the guard. I don't know. You know, the real thing is, the Mike and Hudson debate both come down to books. So whichever one you think is better evidence, I guess you can take it. I'd take the logbook is probably better because, you know, that is clearing up stuff from the games already, and I feel like, but still is Frights, so, you know, I don't know, I just feel like it was intentional to have Mike in the FNaF 3 office. So, yeah, do you remember when this video was about why Mike isn't Fritz Smith? So yeah, I do believe the logbook is showing Mike isn't Fritz. But who is Fritz Smith? Well, you have to wait until my video about who Jeremy and Fritz are comes out to learn about that. And
Jeremy Fitzgerald and Fritz Smith are the protagonists of Five Nights at Freddy's 2. Jeremy being playable on nights 1 to 6, and Fritz only being playable on night 7, unlike other protagonists in the franchise. These two aren't really talked about as much, and that makes sense. FNaF 2 is probably the most irrelevant mainline game. The DCI never come again, the Bite of 87 doesn't matter. It worked much better when 1 to 3 were the only games, honestly. Because of that, and because they're only mentioned once every few years, Jeremy and Fritz aren't really talked about anymore. I mean, they are talked about, but it's mostly just making theories of them being someone else, not really who they are as their own characters. Fritz in particular is heavily theorized to be Michael Afton, a theory I agreed with for a long time but recently stopped believing. You can watch the video I made explaining why that is. Ever since I made that video, I've been wondering, what is Fritz Smith's role in the story? Who is he? And who is Jeremy? Well, that's what I want to talk about today. I'm surprised how much story I've found for these guys, honestly, and I'm excited to share it with you all. But before we get into that, I couldn't help but notice only 92% of people who watch my videos are subscribed, and I feel like that's a little backwards. I feel like it should be 8% are subscribed, so why don't you subscribe and help me fix the numbers? First things first, I think we can safely say that Jeremy and Fritz are the parents of the missing children. Jeremy and Fritz, yeah, this is the same name. FFPS was made to tie up loose ends, and then we see in the final grave ending, 2 of the missing children share the same names as the night guards. I mean, come on, this is spoon-fed lore. So yeah, both of them are parents of the missing children, great, but there's still more to talk about. Let's talk about Jeremy first, since he is the main protagonist of FNaF 2. As I just said, he's the missing child, Jeremy's father. But he might also be the father of another kid, Cassidy. I know what you're thinking, where did I possibly pull this from? Well, let's take a look at the modern era. In the modern era, we have a character named Cassie, a name that is obviously very similar to Cassidy. And then we have her father, who is very strongly implied to be named Jeremy. Probably Jeremy from Help Wanted 1. How do I know this? In Ruin, when you enter the daycare theater, there are 2 names written on the screen, Greg and, interestingly, Jeremy. The screen is playing the show Fazbear and Friends, which we know Cassie's dad is connected to since he collects merch from the show. Not only that, but the same GIF that plays on the screen is played in the secret Michael Afton room in Security Breach, probably implying that the 2 people's names written on the screen are connected to the room. Gregory, you know, Greg, is already connected because that's where he plays the therapy tapes in Security Breach, so Jeremy would most likely have to be connected to it too. And as I said, the Freddy and Friends GIF is played in the room, and Cassie's dad is the only character connected to Freddy and Friends. And again, the projector plays the same GIF. Cassie's dad can't be Gregory, so he has to be the Jeremy. This means that Michael's room is most likely his hideout in Security Breach. And you might be wondering where I get that he's Jeremy from Help Wanted 1 besides them sharing a name. Well, this comes from actually Help Wanted 2, there is the witch story.
Now let me tell you a story about a young woman who, when she was little, was led into a dark forest by a witch, and almost eaten. She had fallen for the friendly voice without discernment, and was led astray. She had escaped before being thrown into the oven, but would have a scar for the rest of her life. When she had grown, she sought revenge on the witch, and entered the forest again willingly, this time with the confidence of age and experience. She was greeted at the mouth of the forest by a young boy who offered to help guide her through the darkness. She welcomed the help, and followed the young boy over the river, through the jagged trees, and toward a small house. "Come," the boy said, "press here before killing the witch." The young woman was tired and would kill the witch in the morning. She followed the boy into the house. The oven door closed. The witch would finally have her meal.
I feel like the first assumption of this story is that it's about Vanessa, Glitchtrap, and Gregory. However, that doesn't really fit with these characters. Vanessa wasn't almost killed by Glitchtrap. She did return to kill him in the Princess Quest 4 ending, but she succeeded. She wasn't killed, so it's not Vanessa. Some people think it's about Cassie, but I doubt that because, again, she was only attacked by the Mimic once. Cassie also already had her own Candy Cadet story in Ruin, and I doubt it's foreshadowing since the Candy Cadet stories have always been about the games they are in. So what is this story about? Well, probably Cassie's dad, since he's killed by the Mimic or Glitchtrap. However, that means he must have had a near-death experience with him before returning to kill him. And we know that Cassie's dad and Glitchtrap have interacted before because in the cut Vanny lines that may still be canon, it is said Glitchtrap held on to Cassie's dad, so they have to have interacted. And there's really only one point this could be: Help Wanted 1. A lot of people assumed Jeremy died in Help Wanted 1, but that was never confirmed. It's assumed that he cut off his face to get rid of Glitchtrap, being the Halloween mask Tape Girl talked about.
There was something that looked like a Halloween mask laying on the floor. I didn't understand. Ink must have spilled.
But we learn in Curse of Dreadbear that Glitchtrap did make Vanessa make a mask, so the Halloween mask Tape Girl talks about may just be that, a mask Jeremy cut off. The ink would probably still be blood though. He probably cut himself. The whole Glitchtrap experience would leave Jeremy with a mental scar, maybe a physical one as well. And then years later he returns to kill Glitchtrap, maybe with the help of Help-Eye, who be what the boy represents. However, Glitchtrap ends up getting him in the end. And yeah, that's basically why I think Cassie's dad is named Jeremy. All of this connects back to my idea that Jeremy Fitzgerald is Cassie's father because, you know, we have a character named Jeremy who is the father to a girl named Cassie, a very similar name to Cassidy. It is not the most solid connection, but I think it's, you know, it's cool. And it would explain why we focus on Jeremy specifically, because he's the Golden Freddy kid's father, which would give him more importance. After all, let's be honest, why would we focus on the Bonnie kid's dad? Who cares about the Bonnie kid? Side note, I like to imagine that Jeremy, Cassie's dad Jeremy by the way, not the missing kid or the night guard. It's very confusing. I like to imagine that Jeremy is also related to Jeremy Fitzgerald, and that he named his daughter after his sister. It would be strange to have two kids with the same name, but hey, at least all the Jeremys are connected. I know this Fitzgerald family tree I've created is a headcanon, but I think there's enough loose connections that it can kind of work. Anyway, let's get back to Jeremy the First. I think he lost his kids, like I just said, they are the missing children, and I think he worked at Freddy's and FNaF 2 to find his kids. And I know what you're probably thinking, if this is true, isn't he kind of, you know, stupid? His kids went missing at the other Freddy's 2 years ago. Why would he find them here? I thought this too until I realized that a grieving and probably guilt-ridden parent probably isn't thinking very rationally, and if there's a possibility they could see their kids again, they would most likely jump at the opportunity. It's also possible that Jeremy was called to the location. In case you don't know, between nights in FNaF 2 there are these dream sequences, dreams that someone is having. Something that no one talks about though is that these dreams start right as the game opens, meaning that if Jeremy has these dreams, he could have been called before he became the night guard. I don't believe that, I still think the dreams are Mike's, but it's interesting to think about. I imagine that when he was there he felt the presence of his kids, like how in the FNaF movie Mike felt closer to Garrett while he was at Freddy's. This explains why Jeremy returned on night 6, which he shouldn't have done, as Ralph, the phone guy, calls out.
Hello. What on earth are you doing there? Didn't you get the memo? The place is closed down, at least for a while.
Explains why he keeps coming back night after night. He just wants to be with his kids again. Unfortunately, not only do his children not recognize him, but he becomes victim to the bite of 87, ending his story. I honestly really like this narrative. I think it makes FNaF 2 much sadder. I think it could have been improved if Jeremy was instead the father of a DCI victim, but whatever. This also works with the headcanon from the FNaF 2 days that Jeremy is a detective. Maybe he was a detective, and then he hears about the DCI case, and he wants to work at Freddy's because he already has a personal connection to it. And he keeps returning because he feels his children's presence, even after he knows all the dangers. I don't know. I also think it fits with how FNaF has always been about families. Even in 1 to 3, we focus on the MCI, who were a family in a way. And of course, now, with 1 to 6, we focus on the Afton and Emily's. In the bottom arc, it seems that Gregory, Vanessa, and Freddy are going to be their own little family themselves. There's also Cassie and her dad, the Mimic and the Murrays. My point is, Jeremy would add to this theme instead of just being a random guy who wanted a job. I also like how it potentially explains why Jeremy just kept coming back every night, even after knowing the dangers. I like it when the protagonists have a reason for coming back, what can I say? Now, let's talk about Fritz. Unlike Jeremy, I don't think Fritz was looking for his kid. I think he worked there because he was asked to, because I think Fritz is a Fredbear employee. Now, I just want to give a quick shout out to Sire Squawks, because he was the first person I heard talk about this idea. Go watch his video, he definitely explains it more in depth than I will. But basically, on night 5 of FNaF 2, Ralph says,
"We don't have a replacement for your ship yet, but we're working on it. We're going to try to contact the original restaurant owner. I think the name of the place was Fredbear's Family Diner or something like that. It was closed for years, though. I doubt we'll be able to track anybody down."
Notice how he mentions they're trying to track down the owner after mentioning a replacement for Jeremy's shift. this could be because they're trying to track down the owner so he can recommend someone to cover Jeremy's shift. So yeah, Fritz was a Fredbear employee and he just happens to be the father of the missing kid. Not much going on here. Why did he tamper with the animatronics? Who knows? Maybe he was a technician and wanted to see what was up with the old animatronics. Or maybe Fritz is William under an alias and he's coming back to get the remnants from the classics. I don't know. You could also say that maybe Fritz was who the job was intended for in FNaF 6. Henry says this job wasn't intended for you, to Mike. Maybe it was intended for Fritz, you know, they're both fathers of the dead kids. And Fritz could be the guard because he already has experience from FNaF 2. Or maybe Fritz was who was killed by Baby at the start of the game, ending his story. I don't like the Fritz narrative as much as Jeremy's. Honestly, I prefer Mike being Fritz, or at least my version of it, where Mike was manipulated by William into helping him, because he thought they were helping the bite victim and the kids. I like the whole aspect of Mike unknowingly helping the man he thought they were trying to stop. I thought it could have played into his guilt really well, you know, helping the guy who hurt so many people, even his sibling. And he could blame himself for William's crimes. And Michael would spend the rest of his life trying to undo his mistakes and find redemption, even if he wasn't actively seeking redemption. I guess we can still get a bit of that with Sister Location since he does help William there, but it's just not the same. However, I do appreciate how it ties into the other two night guards in FNaF 2, Jeremy and William, who was a night guard before Jeremy. All three of them are parents of the dead kids who linger at Freddy's. Even if this wasn't always intended, I still think it's pretty neat. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video exploring Jeremy and Fritz. I know it's basically me just writing fan fiction and going over headcanons, but I do think there is, you know, some ground to stand on for them, and I do think they're very interesting. I really just want to share them with you guys. Let me know who you think Jeremy and Fritz are in the comments. Is Jeremy Mike and William is Fritz, or is Jeremy Fritz, or is Fritz Henry? All of those type of things. FNaF 2, despite being the most irrelevant game, did introduce some of the most iconic characters in the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. JJ, RWQ, some of them are even important, like Shadow Freddy. There's also the Wizards, who are by far some of the creepiest animatronics in the series, but none of them are more iconic than the puppet, but this video isn't about her. Some other iconic characters were the newly introduced toy animatronics, who, much like the classics, are a perfect mix between endearing and creepy. They really are animatronics I could see being at a kid's pizza place. One of them was more popular than the others, but they all stood out in their own ways. Except BB, everyone kinda hated him. Oh, and Toy Freddy wasn't the most popular.
FNaF number 8 is that Toy Freddy, well, you know, he's kinda, fat. I mean, come on, you know, come on, what can I say?
And despite their popularity, they aren't really that talked about when it comes to theorizing. There's only really two theories that pop to mind when concerning these characters. Who built them, William or Henry, and if they are possessed. And if so, by whom? The last one is what I want to talk about today, so let's do it, I guess. I don't really have a transition. For some background, the other theory besides the toys being possessed is that they are purely acting based on their AI, and they're trying to kill Jeremy because of their faulty facial recognition, or because they were never given a proper night mode. Basically what Ralph says on night 1.
While our engineers don't really have an explanation for this, the working theory is that the robots were never given a proper night mode. So when it gets quiet, they think they're in the wrong room. So then they go try to find where the people are, and in this case, that's your office.
And that's basically the argument for the toys being AI. That's what Ralph said they were. So all I have to say is, I guess the animatronics in FNaF 1 saw you as a naked endoskeleton without its costume on. I mean, if we're taking Ralph's word as gospel, that must be what's happening. But wait, we know that's not true, since they don't stuff the actual endoskeleton in FNaF 1, and you know they're possessed by the souls of angry dead children. So clearly Ralph is not a reliable source. He means well, but he just isn't. Not only that, but the toys are clearly possessed. Look at these renders of Toy Freddy and Chica. Notice anything that might stand out compared to their usual selves? Their eyes are blacked out, which is just like what the animatronics in the last game did. Those animatronics are possessed. There's even more evidence to support the toys being possessed. In FNaF AR, when the character of Mangle was introduced, there's an email that talks about how they couldn't recreate him climbing on the wall. This implies that Mangle was possessed, since if she was only acting on his AI, they should be able to recreate the wall crawling. But they can't. So yeah, the toys are pretty clearly possessed. Now hopefully Toys AI can die in peace. But that's not the end. We still have to figure out who is possessing the toys. But before we do that, I have to ask you guys to like and subscribe because I am trying to hit 2K before the end of February. And subscribing would just help me out a ton. There are two main theories as to who possesses the toys. The original 5 children murdered by William Afton years before the events of FNaF 2, nicknamed the MCI, or the new set of murders that happened in this game, nicknamed the DCI. Let's go over the theory that they are possessed by the MCI first. The idea spawns from Ralph saying that the toys were made using parts from the Wizards.
By now I'm sure you've noticed the older models sitting in the back room. Those are from the previous location, and we just use them for parts now.
And the fact that the DCI never really get a proper ending. They just kind of show up and that's it. Hell, there's some people who think the DCI never happened at all. It does though, the DCI happening is a pretty important part of FNaF 2's story. That's the main evidence for Toys MCI that I know of. I disagree with this theory for a few reasons. First of all, the whole idea that the parts of the MCI in the toys possesses them and cause them to act up at night. That's not exactly how that works. It's more complicated. There's this great video by Glitchexity that explains that soul splitting isn't that simple. The spirits have to be willing to travel to a new vessel. Make sure to check out that video for a more in-depth explanation. But I actually disagree with the theory for a simpler reason. The DCI exists. Think about it from a storytelling point of view. Why would Scott introduce a new set of kids who died at the FNaF 2 location in a game with a new set of animatronics who act up at night and are clearly possessed if these new animatronics were just possessed by the old set of kids? That would make the DCI completely irrelevant, and they're already really irrelevant. Like, seriously, I feel like it's pretty clear what Scott was going for here. I know some people take issue with how the DCI never do anything again and never get a proper conclusion, but I'd argue they actually do get one in FNaF 2 itself. At the end of the game, the toys are scrapped, and I feel like this is most likely supposed to indicate the DCI being free, giving the DCI an ending in the game they're introduced in. This is why they never get focused on again. They moved on as quickly as they possessed the animatronics. At most, we could push them moving on to the FNaF 3 Fire, since their shells are in that game, but it doesn't really matter either way. The truth is, and not a lot of people want to accept this, DCI are just a plot device for the story of FNaF 2 to work. They were never going to be actually fleshed out characters. Hell, the MCI aren't even fleshed out characters. Their purpose is to possess the toys, and that's it. Now, there are some other arguments against Toys DCI. I know one is people believing the DCI happens after Night 5 and before Night 6, which contradicts the toys being possessed by them since they are active as early as Night 1. But the DCI is actually first mentioned on, I think, Night 3, with Ralph telling us about false rumors.
Oh hey, before I go, I wanted to ease your mind about any rumors you might have heard lately. You know how these local stories come and go and seldom mean anything. I can personally assure you that whatever is going on out there, however tragic it may be, has nothing to do with our establishment. It's just all rumor and speculation, people trying to make a buck, you know. Our guard during the day has reported nothing unusual, and he's on watch from opening till close.
It's then said an investigation is going on, and then the day guard, who was the previous night guard, leaves suddenly.
Okay, so just to update you, there's been somewhat of an investigation going on. We may end up having to close for a few days, I don't know. I want to emphasize, though, that it's really just a precaution. Fazbear Entertainment denies any wrongdoing. These things happen sometimes. From what I understand, the building is on lockdown. No one is allowed in or out, you know, especially concerning any previous employees. When we get it all sorted out, we may move you to the day shift. A position just became available.
The DCI seems to have happened at night, since no one is around, and that's clearly a security guard killing them. So the DCI happened the week before Jeremy's shift. Rumors are going around, probably about kids who went missing just as they knew Freddy's opened its doors. And then the cops start investigating the location, and William goes on the run, probably because he knew the cops were close to finding something, which they do. That's why Ralph was freaking out during the Night 6 call.
Hello? What on earth are you doing there? Didn't you get the memo? The place is closed down, at least for a while. Someone used one of the suits. We had a spare in the back, a yellow one. Someone used it. Now none of them are acting right.
So yeah, the DCI happened before the game. Also, something else people take issue with when it comes to the DCI possessing the toys is that they were never stuffed, which is just a non-issue. First of all, we're clearly not seeing the entire incident. There's definitely more has to happen after this, since William does hide the bodies. Or you could argue Fazbear Entertainment were the ones who hid the bodies. Also, Charlie possessed the puppet, and she was never stuffed into it. The crying child possesses an animatronic in the week before, and he died in a hospital. Also, we see that Mangle's already moving during the minigame, perhaps implying the DCI are already starting to possess the toys. I also know there's that theory where the only DCI victim is Cassie. I disagree with that for a few reasons. First of all, it relies on the assumption that Charlie was the 5th kid in the MCI, which, I mean, it's possible she never went missing. She was straight up murdered. Like, they would have found her body. It was just left in the alley. William didn't hide it. Also, Golden Freddy was clearly the 5th kid during FNaF 1, so this would have to be the retcon Scott talked about. In case you don't know, before FNaF 6 came out, Scott confirmed there was one retcon in the series. Although Scott's definition of retcon seems to be a little different than what it actually is. His definition seems to be anything that's changing something that's already been confirmed. So for example, Mike Schmidt being the son of the killer, that is a retcon, but Scott wouldn't consider it a retcon because it wasn't already confirmed in the series. But it does recontextualize FNaF 1. Take that as you will. Anyways, he would retcon the puppet kid into being the 5th kid and just never imply it anywhere again, since in the novels, Golden Freddy is the 5th kid. In the movie, Golden Freddy is the 5th kid. And that's a continuity where we know the puppet exists, so yeah. Also, like, there's clearly 5 kids in the DCI, and it's not just like the MCI apparitions. Since the puppet is asking us to save them, we can't save them if they're already ghosts and they're already dead, which actually probably implies that the DCI were still somewhat alive when Freddy was moving around, which is actually pretty sad to think about. And yeah, that's it. The toys are possessed, and they are possessed by the DCI because literally, why would they exist if not to explain the toys moving around? And then they move on after being scrapped, or more likely the FNaF 3 fire, since their shells are still around. I know some people think they're in Lefty, but I disagree with that theory. I think if they were, Henry probably would have said something, like how he talked about the MCI in his insanity speech. But to be honest, I'm perfectly fine with Lefty DCI. I'm actually fine with any DCI theory besides them not existing, because like I said, they really don't matter. Sure, the DCI are in the monitor, whatever. I used to like the theory that DCI were in Scrap Trap back in the day. He repaired himself with the shells from FNaF 3. I thought it was cool, but whatever. If there's one thing Five Nights at Freddy's is known for, it's the confusing timeline. Although over the past 10 years, the community has come to an almost complete understanding of the series' timeline. Notice how I said almost? That's because there is one game in this franchise that the community still hasn't come to a complete consensus on when it takes place. Well, relative to its place in the narrative. Besides the year FNaF 2, almost every game's year is debated, but who gives a shit about that? That game, of course, being Sister Location, that means on the title. The only thing we really know about this game's timeline is that it's sometime before FNaF 6. Other than that, it's basically all over the place. Some people argue it's before FNaF 2, some people argue it's after FNaF 3, so that's a pretty small range of time it can happen. I've made a video going over this game's confusing timeline before, but to be honest, it kind of sucks, and I want to redo it, and I also got called out on Twitter for it, so yeah. First things first, let's talk about how Sister Location is not before FNaF 2 or 1. Which I'm pretty sure is the community consensus outside like the theorizing section of the community. The evidence for this is that Fritz Smith, who is speculated to be Michael Afton, gets fired for odor. The odor could be from Mike being a rotting corpse. There's also the hand unit saying that Circus Baby's Entertainment Rentals opened after the closure of a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, but he never said which one, so he could be talking about the first Freddy's opened before FNaF 2. Sister Location being before FNaF 2 also gives Michael a motivation for working at FNaF 1 and 2. He is looking for his father. There's also the logbook, which may be during FNaF 1. In this book, Mike references Sister Location, so obviously Sister Location would have already had to happen. So with all that out of the way, here's why Sister Location being before FNaF 2 is most likely incorrect. Looking at the evidence first, as for the odor, not only does this rely on the assumption that Mike is Fritz, which is not confirmed and I disagree with, the odor can also be explained in other ways rather than him being a rotten corpse. Ralph says that the animatronics in FNaF 2 smell awful. Alright, Ralph doesn't outright say it, but like, come on, that's obviously what he's implying when he says, and the smell, ugh. Like he's saying the smell is why the lizards weren't reused. Fritz tampered with and had direct contact with those animatronics. Because of that, Fritz smells bad. It's pretty straightforward, I think. Same thing that probably happened with Mike in FNaF 1. He tampered with the animatronics that, as Ralph said, haven't had a bath, so Mike smells bad. Furthermore, in Help Wanted, Tape Girl says that when companies want to fire someone, they'll find little things to build up a case. So maybe that's what Fazbear Entertainment was doing with Mike and Fritz. They were using odor as a little thing to fire them because, well, they probably saw something they weren't supposed to see. In Fritz's case, probably the DCI's bodies, and in Mike's case, probably Ralph's body or something, I don't know. So yeah, the odor doesn't really point towards Mike being a walking corpse at the time. Hand Unit's line is just telling us when the rental service started, not when the game takes place. As for Sister Location being before FNaF 1 giving Mike a motive, yeah, it does, but there's multiple different motivations Mike could have for working at the FNaF 1 location. He was working under William's orders, he just needed a job and kept coming back because of his brother, he was investigating Freddy's, 0 Point Field, on and on and on. Sister Location doesn't need to happen before FNaF 1 to give Mike a motivation is what I'm saying. Also, and this is not the strongest argument, but Sister Location being before FNaF 1 means William is trapped in the safe room during Mike's shift. If that's true, Mike would have found William. There's a part in the Fazbear's Fright books where the narrator says William Afton has an unmistakable energy, so Mike would have found William, and yeah, the games would have ended pretty early. Not the best argument since obviously it wasn't planned out back then, but still thought I should bring it up just because this line is really funny. As for the logbook, I have to admit it is pretty good evidence for Sister Location happening before FNaF 1, if it is during FNaF 1, but we don't know of that for sure. It could be during FNaF 3, it could be a meta book, it could be fucking during the Pizzaplex, who knows? I really need to make that logbook video. But there's something else that, in my opinion, proves Sister Location is after FNaF 1. Before I get into the definitive reasons Sister Location is after FNaF 1, I have to ask you guys to subscribe. I want to hit 2,500 subscribers before the end of April, and subscribing would be a massive help. So definitely subscribe to help me out. But now let's talk about the real reason Sister Location has to be after FNaF 1. the Follow Me minigames. There are minigames that are played between the nights of FNaF 3. They depict William Afton dismantling the main 4 animatronics before being attacked by the spirits within the shells and getting spring-locked. The reason I bring these up is because it's heavily implied, borderline confirmed, that the original missing children are within the Funtime animatronics. I won't go into too much detail about that today. There are multiple videos going over it that you can watch after this one. Anyways, for this to be true, William must have gotten the MCI's remnant from the classics. And the only point we know of that this can happen is Follow Me, where he destroys the animatronics. We know that William was missing by the time of Mike's speech, which likely takes place a little bit after Ennard leaves his body. He's saying he's going to come find William, which implies William is missing. This lines up with Follow Me, since William would be missing in the safe room. So that means Follow Me is before Sister Location. So when does Follow Me take place? Before or after FNaF 1? The evidence for it being before FNaF 1 is the buttons on Freddy and Bonnie. They lack these buttons in FNaF 1, but their withered counterparts have the buttons. So that must mean these are the unwithered animatronics before FNaF 1, right? Furthermore, we already see that some part of the children's souls are at Freddy's during the final Follow Me minigame, which should be after their endos are taken, meaning some part of their souls are attached to the shells. So theoretically, if the animatronics were rebuilt, the children could still possess them. On their own, these are fair arguments, but Follow Me is almost definitely after FNaF 1, and here's why. As for the buttons, I think we can safely say these aren't a major timeline hint. Why? Because in the final Follow Me minigame, we see William spring Bonnie's suit without a button. However, in-game, Springtrap has a button. This shows to us that the buttons don't really matter. If Scott cared enough to add them to Freddy and Bonnie, why wouldn't he add them to Spring Bonnie? Not convinced? Take a look at FNaF 2. In the Save the minigame, the player takes control of Withered Freddy. The Freddy that has the button, but look at his design. No button. It's just not there. This means the minigame sprites aren't the most accurate things ever. And Scott probably just added the buttons because it looks better with them than without them. Also, the location Follow Me is very clearly abandoned. There are boards on the wall and the place is leaking. But none of this is as concrete as the thing that proves Follow Me is after FNaF 1. It's FNaF 3 itself. In FNaF 3, one of the most prominent features is the mascot heads that can be seen throughout the location. Notice how they are all torn up and lacking their endos, just like how they are after Follow Me. The Steam description also points out that only the empty shells are found, which means that even when FNaF 3 released, William was taking the endos in Follow Me. For Follow Me to be before FNaF 1, the animatronics would have to be rebuilt, then dismantled again, just like they were in Follow Me. That seems overly convoluted and isn't really implied anywhere. So if Follow Me is after FNaF 1, and Sister Location is after Follow Me, or at least the first 4 minigames, Sister Location is after FNaF 1. So we've narrowed down when Sister Location can happen a little bit, but can we narrow it down even further? We sure can try. I am 100% confident Sister Location is after FNaF 1, but is it before or after FNaF 3? Well, this is where things get pretty complicated. The casting call for Michael Afton says that Mike is between the ages of 18 and 35, which should mean that at the latest, Sister Location can be in the early to mid 2000s. However, Henry is listed as being middle-aged in FNaF 6, and he should be in his 70s, not exactly middle-aged. So it seems that the casting calls are not a reliable source. However, PJ Haywood did say Michael was a younger character than William. The reason this is important is because, assuming FNaF 3 is in 2023, hell, it even makes sense even if it's in 2015, Michael would be as old, maybe even older than William in the opening cutscene.
She can dance. She can sing. She's equipped with a built-in helium tank for inflating balloons right at her fingertips. She can take song requests. She can even dispense ice cream. Father, it's me, Michael. I did it. I found it. It was right where you said it would be.
I consider PJ Haywood to be a more reliable source, as he said Scott is very direct with what he wants. If he wanted Mike to sound younger than William, Mike is younger than William. However, there are other important aspects to consider here, one of which being that Sister Location was originally going to be the final game, and we don't know if this includes a custom-made update or not, so let's just assume Scott's talking about only the main game. I feel like if Sister Location was the final game, it would have to be before FNaF 3, because of the missing children being in the Fun Times. We don't know for sure if the so-called Fun Times MCI was always Scott's original intention, but since some people were able to figure it out before FNaF 6 release, and I see no reason for Scott to retcon it into being the case, we can assume it was always the intention. We also know that Sister Location was made in response to people not really understanding FNaF 4's story.
The ones, yeah, there were mysteries. 4 ended up just too mysterious to the point where you really couldn't, there was no real way to figure out what was going on. And it left people unsatisfied. And like I said, with jumping from 3 to 4, I knew that I had to go in and straighten that out. It's like, people aren't really happy with this. I need to make another game. I need to kind of ground this again, not necessarily in reality, but I need to ground it in
kind of storytelling.
And most of the game is kind of explaining the FNaF 4 story. Now, I made a video on what I think FNaF 4's original story was, and the MCI were actually an important part of the story that no one really understood. So bringing them back would be something Scott would do to explain the role in the story. I think Ennard is supposed to represent the bite victim being put back together, the MCI all coming together to form one entity, with Elizabeth there too. If you want more information on that, make sure to watch my other video. This is important because if Sister Location was after FNaF 3, the series would end with the missing children not moving on. They would just be in Mike's body forever. This is not only an unsatisfying ending, but I'm not sure if Scott would want to end the story without the children moving on. However, since Elizabeth never moves on with Sister Location being the original ending, I guess I could see it. But if Sister Location is after FNaF 3, we have to ask why Michael waited so many years to go and help his sister. We have no reason to think Mike would wait at all to go put Elizabeth back together. Well, when Sister Location originally came out, now with the new story, we do have some new stuff like the theory of Vanessa being an Afton, which I do believe could possibly explain Mike waiting. He would have to take care of her. But I'm talking about before security breach and all that came out. When it originally came out, why would he wait? Now, Mike did say in his speech that he found something, which means William left him something to look for, but he also says it's right where William said it would be. So if he had to look, he probably wouldn't have to look very far. Anyways, the reason I bring this all up is because it doesn't make much sense for Mike to wait to help Elizabeth, so he probably didn't. Some people say William could have left a note or a voice recording from Mike in case of his death and follow me, and Mike took a while to find that, but that's a headcanon. Another thing people use to say Sister Location is during or after FNaF 3 is that during Mike's speech, we see the aftermath of the FNaF 3 fire, so the speech could be happening during the visuals of the cutscene. And while that could be true, it doesn't mean Sister Location is during or after FNaF 3 because, well, it's possible there's a gap between Ennard leaving Mike's body and the speech, since Mike says he's living in shadows. Also, the audio and the visuals might just not line up. So Sister Location is probably not during or after FNaF 3 due to Mike being said to be a younger character than William, and it not making much sense for Mike to wait. The only way it really works is if Mike is the FNaF 3 guard and William asked him during or after the fire, but I very much doubt that, since at that point they would have both tried to kill each other. So Sister Location is after FNaF 1, but before FNaF 3, and this is the common consensus in the theorizing section of the community. But can we narrow it down to a year? No, but we can get a time frame. The Fazbear's Fright story You're the Band takes place in 2015. However, Mike is in the story, and noticeably he is not a purple zombie. He is said to look like he's in his 20s, but this is honestly a minor thing as age has never really mattered in this franchise. For example, Charlie is said to be 17 in the Silver Eyes, but in the Fourth Closet it is revealed she was born in 1980. The Silver Eyes takes place in 1995, meaning she would be 15. There's also Edwin's whole age thing in Tales, and a lot of examples in Fazbear's Fright. So clearly age is not something Scott puts much thought into. What's important is that Mike and the protagonist, Sylvia, visit Freddy's and the animatronics are intact and can move, implying that Follow Me and Sister Location haven't happened yet. However, it should be noted this was a cut story, and it was just released in a bonus book that you can't even buy by itself. You have to buy it with a book set. And while I'm sure it wasn't written with the intention to be scrapped, what's canon is dubious, so we can really only be used as supporting evidence if anything. But if this is still canon, Sister Location is sometime after 2015. Preferably it would be in 2015, so it can be 30 years after Elizabeth's death. And we do know Scott likes his 30-year anniversaries. If you think Elizabeth dies in 1987 or after, then those years work just as well, as long as it's before 2023, depending on your timeline when FNaF 3 takes place. However, like I said, the story was scrapped. There is something else we can use to pin down a year for Sister Location, or rather someone, Vanessa. Now what I'm going to say is probably controversial here on YouTube, but I do believe Vanessa is an Afton, William's daughter to be exact, not Mike's. I'm not going over all the evidence for the theory today, but I do plan on making a video about it in the future, so be on the lookout for that. However, let's just assume Vanessa is an Afton for the sake of the rest of this video. Vanessa being an Afton can definitely help us pin down the year's Sister Location, or at least a range of time it can happen. Vanessa is said to be 23 during FNaF AR. Now we don't know the gap between FNaF AR and Security Breach, but I'm pretty sure they happen very close together, so we'll see Vanessa is also 23 there. And I know what you're thinking, Vanessa's age was revealed in unreleased emails. Can we really use these? And I'd say probably. Vanessa's last name was revealed to start with A in the emails as well, and on her official GameJolt page it also starts with an A, meaning the info here is probably accurate. I'm not entirely sure if Vanessa is 23 though, since her email is Nest97. Usually when there are two numbers like that at the end of a username, it's the year the user was born, which in this case would be 1997, and it seemed like the emails were written as if they were in 2020, which is when they were written in the real world. In the FNaF AR emails they have a date of 2019 in the Ultimate Guide, and what's interesting is that they didn't remove this, so it could actually point towards special delivery being in 2019, although I've heard this is actually the date that they were written IRL, but I haven't actually seen anyone explain why that is, so if someone could explain that in the comments, let me know. It seems more just like an assumption. Anyway, that either means FNAF AR is in 2020, or they were just written like they were written in the current year, but the actual events happened later in the timeline. Anyways, it's possible whoever wrote the emails thought Vanessa was 23 since she was born in 1997, but she was actually much older. But then again, you could argue it says she was born in 1997 because Vanessa is 23, and the emails were written as if they were in 2020. So I'm not sure. Let's just assume she is 23 though. If she is, we can use it to help us get a time frame of when sister location takes place. If security breach is in 2029, she would be born in 2006, and if it's in 2035, she would be born in 2012. We don't know how old she was during the court case mentioned in therapy tapes, and a child of any age can be a witness in a court hearing, but let's just say she's 5. So that means at the earliest, sister location is in 2011, if security breach is in 2029, in 2017 if it's in 2035. And if FNAF AR really is in 2020, then 2022 is the earliest it can take place. Now I don't know if I'm onto anything here or if I'm on something, but since I do think Vanessa is in Afton, I will say that I do think sister location is in the 2010s or at least sometime after FNAF 1. However, we aren't done yet. There's another game here to consider, FNAF 4's gameplay. Does sister location take place before or after FNAF 4's gameplay? We know that FNAF 4's gameplay has to be at least after FNAF 1 because you can hear Ralph's phone call from night 1 of FNAF 1. The gameplay is also very similar to FNAF 1. So is sister location before or after this gameplay? Well, I actually think it's sometime before. First of all, let's speak about the narrative. The main antagonist of this game is Nightmare, and in UCN, Nightmare says, he is saying this to William, which most likely means that Nightmare represents William's evil in some way. That means if sister location is after FNAF 4's gameplay, Michael defeated the physical manifestation of his father's evil and then a few years later went and helped his father out. That's silly. It makes much more sense for Michael to defeat his father's evil after he's already on his quest to find and most likely kill his dad. Hell, you could even say that him defeating Nightmare is what inspires him to start looking for William, since he has proven to himself he can defeat him. For some actual evidence, we have Nightmare Fredbear's stomach mouth. Since Nightmare Fredbear has only ever appeared in Mike's dreams, not showing up in Didophobia, I think it's possible that Nightmare Fredbear is the physical manifestation of Mike's guilt at failing to protect his siblings. He is Fredbear for obvious reasons, and he has the stomach mouth because of Elizabeth's death. This would even explain why Nightmare takes his form. It's like William would use Michael's guilt against him, maybe. I don't know. I literally just thought of that while I was reading this out. This would most likely indicate sister location is before FNAF 4, since we have no reason to assume Mike knows how Elizabeth dies prior to sister location. And if you're wondering how Mike knows how she died, on night 3, Mike can go to the gallery and listen to Baby describe Elizabeth's death. But none of this is as concrete as the logbook, which shows us that Mike has already gone through the events of sister location. But Nightmare Fredbear is drawn under a section about recent dreams, meaning Mike has already gone through sister location while having the FNAF 4 nightmares. So sister location is after FNAF 1 in the 2010s, but before FNAF 4 and 3. Honestly, I think sister location will probably get a date soon, with a new book called Secret Artifacts, which is said to have some things from Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals. It's possible we'll get something from sister location's time with a date on it. To be honest, I don't really like sister location being in the 2010s. I think the 90s or 2000s fit better. Also, you guys might have noticed I didn't mention the story Didophobia in this video, and that's because I'm not sure if it's before or after sister location, and also because I knew people would argue it's not canon and I didn't want to deal with that. I think you can make a compelling argument for it being before or after. Oh, and I have a mini theory I want to share with you guys that is related to all this, but I didn't know how to fit it in with the rest of the video. My theory goes that Follow Me 1 to 4 happened before sister location, but not the final one. This can fix the narrative issue with William waiting like 20 years to go and get the animatronics for his experiments. But then, after Ennard scooped Mike, William noticed the MCI were inside Mike and goes to get his spring Bonnie suit to try and control the children or to protect himself. But when he goes there, he gets spring locked. That way, when Mike comes to, William is missing and he has to look for him. I actually might start believing this since it fixes a lot of issues with the timeline for me, but I'm not sure.
In Five Nights at Freddy's 11-year history, there has been a lot of debates regarding the lore of the franchise. Some interesting and thought-provoking, like if the Fazbear Frights books and Tales from the Pizzaplex books were canon, which was recently confirmed not to be the case. Some were kind of silly, like if Springtrap was William Afton or Michael Afton, while the answer was clearly Michael and then Scott retconned it due to fan backlash. I think we can all agree on that. There are more confusing debates, like FNAF 4, but there's one debate in the community that has been around for all 11 years now. A debate that at one time was a major talking point in the community, but has died down over the years. That debate is, of course, the Bite of 87. You see, the Bite of 87 has been around since the first game came out.
They used to be allowed to walk around during the day, too, but then there was the Bite of 87. Yeah.
It was most likely a dark joke, and since then, it has always been asked who caused the bite. Back when FNAF 1 came out, the main suspects for the biter were Freddy, Foxy, and Golden Freddy. Nah, I'm just messing with you guys, come on. This video is about Mangle's gender. You clicked on the video, you know what it's about. Mangle's gender was a debate I never found interesting back when FNAF 2 came out. I mean, I was like, what, 7? I had better things to worry about, like annoying Orange reacting to the FNAF 3 trailer. But as I've grown and matured over the last decade,
I'm actually still not interested in it, but I think it could make for a fun video, and it would be fun to look back at this debate and see if we can find an actual answer. So let's start off our discussion about this with some ground rules. First things first, I'm just assuming that Mangle is either a boy or a girl, because that's what the debate was when FNaF 2 came out. I guess it's possible Scott could have made the character of Mangle with another gender identity in mind, but for the purposes of this video, I'm gonna assume that's not the case. Also, what I mean when I'm talking about figuring out Mangle's gender is just in the context of when FNaF 2 originally came out, because I really don't think there's an answer now. Obviously, after FNaF 2's release, Mangle's gender has become more of a joke in the fan base and the franchise, with FNaF World referring to Mangle with both male and female pronouns. Funtime Foxy from Sister Location, who looks very similar to Mangle, also has a similar situation, with Funtime Foxy having a more masculine voice and being referred to with male pronouns, yet being included in Ladies' Night and Sister Location's Custom Night. There's also UCN, where Mangle seems to have a masculine and feminine voice. And of course, what basically confirms Mangle's gender is now a joke is this Steam post. Okay, people have been asking me about Mangle's gender for almost a year now, and I think it's time I finally answer the burning question about whether Mangle is a boy or a girl, so that this community can finally put that matter behind them. The answer is yes. Now, a lot of people seem to be taking this as Scott saying that Mangle's gender is literally yes, like the word yes, but that's not what he's saying. At least that's not how I'm interpreting it. He's saying that he's answering the burning question about whether Mangle is a boy or a girl, and he's saying the answer is yes, Mangle is a boy or a girl, but not literally that Mangle's gender is the word yes. He's just, dodging the question. So I guess you could probably make an argument that Mangle is a boy or a girl nowadays, but clearly Scott doesn't care and neither do I. What I'm curious about is what Mangle's gender was when FNaF 2 originally came out, before it became an in-joke, and that is exactly what we're going to talk about today. So join me and my friend Zetarox as we try to figure out what Mangle's gender was when FNaF 2 came out. But before we get into that, I just really quickly want to ask you guys to subscribe. I'm trying to hit 9,000 before the end of the year, and subscribing will be a massive help. With that out of the way, let's talk about this polarizing debate. Okay, so first things first, let's talk about Mangle's design, or like the actual mascot part of it, the Foxy part. I think this is probably the least important aspect of the debate, but I want to make this video as long as possible. Mangle's made up of pinks and whites and has lipstick along with nail polish on the feet. I think it's not unfair to say Mangle has a stereotypically feminine design. There is the primary color being pink, which is of course considered a more feminine color in society, but I think what's more notable here is the lipstick and the nail polish. I mean, yeah, men can wear that stuff too, but let's be honest, it's definitely more of a stereotypical feminine thing, especially in the 1980s, which is when the character of Mangle seems to have been created. So Mangle's overall design should be evidence for Mangle being a girl, right? If Mangle has these stereotypically feminine features. Well, actually, no, not at all, because of another character within FNaF 2 whose gender was debated when the game came out. Toy Bonnie. If we look at Toy Bonnie, we see that he has a quote-unquote feminine design as well. Big eyelashes, rosy cheeks. Toy Freddy also has these features. This led to a debate about if Toy Bonnie was a boy or a girl, which also happened with FNaF 1 Bonnie too, actually. I don't know if people debate about Toy Freddy's gender, I don't remember. However, even with these feminine design features, Toy Freddy and Toy Bonnie are still canonically male characters. So this should prove that even though Mangle has these stereotypically feminine design features, it doesn't mean Mangle isn't a male character. It's possible the toys just have these design features and it means nothing towards the gender of the animatronic. So that's the design of Mangle out of the way. Now we can start talking about the actual game FNaF 2 itself and the evidence that's hidden within it. Well, the two pieces of it anyway. On night 3 of FNaF 2, Ralph says,
They tried to remake Foxy, They thought the first one was too scary, so they redesigned him to be more kid-friendly and put him in Kids Cove to keep the toddlers entertained, But kids these days just can't keep their hands to themselves. The staff literally had to put Foxy back together at the end of every shift. Eventually, they just stopped trying and left him as some kind of take-apart, put-back-together attraction. Now he's just a mess of parts. I think the employees refer to him as just the Mangle.
And well, that should be it, right? Right there, Mangle is called a he, and says that they tried to make him kid-friendly, which could explain the design details. And it makes sense when you think about it. I mean, Foxy originally was a male character, and Toy Bonnie and Toy Freddy, who have the same sort of feminine characteristics, while being based on male animatronics, are still male characters themselves. So using this logic, Mangle should just be a male too, right? Well, yes, actually, I would agree with you, if it wasn't for FNaF 2's Custom Night. You see, FNaF 2's Custom Night introduced unique challenges for the first time in the series. This fact is mainly overshadowed these days with Golden Freddy mode or 1020 mode, the hardest mode in the game. One of these modes is called Ladies' Night. It includes the characters of Toy Chica, Wither Chica, and Mangle. But wait, I thought...
They thought the first one was too scary, so they redesigned him to be more kid-friendly and put him in Kids Cove
Yeah, this is where the debate really gets started. Why is Mangle in Ladies' Night if Mangle is supposedly a male character? I mean, I guess Foxy and the puppet are there too, but they're on every custom night challenge, so that doesn't really mean anything. Could Mangle actually be a female character? Well, it does kind of make sense when you think about it. I think it should be obvious to all of us that FNaF 2 is kind of rushed. I mean, the game only came out 3 months after the first one, and look at these Mangle renders, dude. And I think it's very likely that the phone calls were one of the first things that were done for the game. I think this makes sense considering that Balloon Boy, a character in FNaF 2, with a unique mechanic of disabling your flashlight but not killing you, is the only main threat in the game to never be mentioned in the phone calls. Which leads me to believe Balloon Boy was a later addition to the game, and I think we can say a similar thing with Mangle's incorporation as well. Since I mean, a majority of Mangle's appearances in this game are just PNGs. The only actual rendered appearances are Kids Cove, the vents, when Mangle's at the vent light, the hallway, and the office. And the jump scare, of course. Everything else is just a PNG, which leads me to believe that at least the PNG renders were some of the last things done for the game. Okay, but where am I going with this? Well, the point I'm trying to make is that it seems like the phone calls were some of the first things done for the game, and Scott didn't choose to update them when he added characters such as Balloon Boy. And we know that some of Mangle's appearances in this game are just PNGs. So Mangle's renders were probably done later in development. So what if when Scott made the phone calls, he didn't have the Mangle design completed? He just knew he wanted to make a mangled Foxy character. And then when he actually got around to designing the characters, he decided, nah, I want Foxy to be a girl, and then he threw them in the custom night challenge without updating the phone calls because he just didn't care. I mean, we know he doesn't care about Mangle's gender now, so who's to say he already didn't care back then? I mean, there's much more important stuff going on in this game than Mangle's gender of all things. Now, most of that is speculation, I'll admit. I mean, I'm confident the phone calls were probably done early in development, but all the stuff with Mangle being made later, I don't know. I do think it's interesting though. And yeah, it's possible Scott forgot he referred to Mangle with male pronouns, and when he was making the custom night challenges, he decided to throw Mangle in Ladies' Night. Thus, that means Mangle is most likely a female character, right? So that would be like the most recent decision compared to the phone calls, which would have most likely been made earlier. Well, I don't know. Because here's the thing, it would break the pattern with the other toys. Freddy is a boy, Toy Freddy is a boy. Bonnie is a boy, Toy Bonnie is a boy. Chica is a girl, Toy Chica is a girl. Foxy's a boy, Foxy is a girl? I don't know, it doesn't really add up. Sure, it's possible that Mangle's a gender bent Foxy, but like none of the others are gender bent, so I don't know. Okay, I can kind of see why this debate became so big now. We have two possibilities, well actually more, but just ignore that, both of which have pretty solid arguments. So yeah, I can see how between the weight of FNaF 2 and 3, when there is nothing else to talk about, this took off. I wish there was something we could use to explain this away. Oh wait, there is, the head on Mangle. Yeah, as most of you might know, I have not mentioned the other head on Mangle in this video yet, and this is where our problem can be settled very easily. I mean, the head has to belong to another animatronic. Which one? I don't know. Since Funtime Foxy in FNaF World, who's just fixed Mangle, doesn't have like a parrot or anything, so it has to be a separate character entirely from Funtime Foxy. I hate that name. Why is he called Funtime Foxy? Why isn't he called Toy Foxy like the rest of the... Whatever, who cares? Who this head is the real question we should be asking. It even shows up again in FNaF 4, but whatever. The point is, maybe this head is male or female, and Mangle is the opposite gender. This can explain why Mangle's voice and UCN in FNaF AR sound both male and female. Maybe while making Ladies' Night in FNaF 2, Scott just decided, yeah, sure, I'll put Mangle in here and the head can be a girl, whatever. But overall, what do I think the gender of the actual Foxy animatronic part of Mangle is, which is probably the part we actually care about, let's be honest? Well, probably a male, due to Ralph's line in the pattern with the other toy animatronics. Also, Ralph only refers to Mangle as a male when talking about the Foxy part, so yeah. So basically, to summarize, Funtime Foxy or Toy Foxy or Fixed Mangle, whatever you want to call him, is a male character. But whoever this head is a female character. It's actually quite simple. I mean, if I'm being honest, I think the real answer is Scott just didn't care when making FNaF 2, and he underestimated how much the fan base would actually care about stuff like this, so it just became a bit of a joke. And to be honest, I don't really care either, actually. I just thought it would be fun to look back at this old debate from 2014 that didn't really matter in the slightest. And I needed to make a quick video too, but ignore that. Honestly, Mangle's gender is whatever you want it to be. I think Scott put it best when talking about Spring Bonnie in FNaF World. Male, female, it's a rabbit, who cares? Oh, Scott. So what do you guys think about this burning question? I think my answer makes a lot of sense from an in-universe standpoint, but I also think it's equally as likely that Scott just didn't really care when making FNaF 2. But I also do think it makes for a fun debate, so whatever. And it was fun to look back at it 11 years later. Like I said, when there's a bunch of downtime between FNaF 2 and 3, I can see how this became a large debate. There really wasn't much else to talk about, and Mangle is referred to as male and female in the same game. game. I mean, there's definitely more to it than I thought. I expected this video to be like 3 pages, and right now it's 9. Also, has anyone else noticed that so many debates from FNaF 2 are still around today? Like Mangle's gender, who stuffed the kids, the bite of 87, if the toys are possessed? I don't know, I think it's kind of interesting. Like I said, let me know in the comments what you think Mangle's gender is. Personally, I'm just going to refer to Mangle with both male and female pronouns interchangeably, because, you know, that's just kind of like the joke with it. So yeah, I'm just going to keep doing that. And make sure to hit the like button and subscribe while you're down there to help me hit 9,000 subs before the end of the year. And if you want to support me further, why not consider joining my memberships? You can join by clicking on the join button right next to the subscribe button. So if that interests you, consider joining. With that said, I just want to say I hope I didn't offend anyone with this video. I've gone over the script a couple times and I think it should be good. But if I have, I just want to say I'm sorry. I really didn't mean to offend anyone. I just thought it would make for a good video to talk about this infamous debate. Anyways, like I said, I hope I didn't offend anybody, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.